which means you cannot participate in the discussion. A video of the meeting will be available on our website. Bwrdd Gweithredol y Ymddiriedolaeth. Joining them today are the Trust's executive board members. Croeso hefyd I rai o'n partneriaid allanol. We also welcome some of our key external partners to today's meeting. Mae'r bwrdd yn gyfrifol am reoli perfformiad a strategaeth yr ymddiriedolaeth. The board is responsible for the strategy and performance of the Trust. Bydd y cadeirydd yn agor ein cyfarfod yn awr. The Chair will now open our meeting.
Bore da a croeso cynnes iawn I chi gyd. Welcome to the Velindre University NHS Trust Public Board Meeting. As you will have just heard, we're pleased to confirm that this meeting is being live streamed today and will be available on the Trust website shortly, should members of the public or indeed our staff wish to view this board meeting at their convenience. And I understand that there are going to be a mix of staff and the public who have joined us today, and everyone is very welcome. Before we commence the meeting today, I'd just like to draw your attention, because I'm sure some of you will already have noticed this, that we've paused the agenda at 11 o'clock this morning, and that's to enable the Trust Board members to join the Welsh NHS Confederation Wellbeing for Wales lecture series at 11 o'clock this morning. The First Minister, followed by the Health Minister for Health and Social Services, are going to be giving keynote addresses. Because of COVID, the NHS Confederation hasn't been able to hold its annual conference, which would have been taking place about now, and so it's happening virtually, and we felt it was important that we had an opportunity to listen to those two keynote addresses. So we will be pausing the meeting at 11 o'clock and then reconvening at 12:30. So can I confirm the process, please, for asking questions before we start? At the end of each paper, I will open discussion up to you all and ask if there are any questions. And if you do have questions, please raise your hand and I'll do my very best to spot you. If I don't, I've got the eagle eyes of Lauren Fear, our board secretary, and others who will alert me that you've got your hands up. And if there's a paper for approval, I will ask, do the board approve the paper? And I would welcome a show of hands or thumbs, however you want to display your approval or not. So if I can go to point one of the agenda, which is apologies. I've received apologies from Gareth Jones, independent member. Kath O'Brien, our interim chief operating officer, but Paul Wilkins, who's the interim director of Velindre Cancer Centre, and Alan Prosser from the Welsh Blood Service are available to represent Kath, and Dr. Jazz Abraham, our executive medical director. Are there any other apologies that I maybe have not received that anybody is aware of? Thank you. I'd like to welcome Professor Andrew Westwell to his first meeting of the board. Andrew's been around at various meetings since he was appointed as an independent member. So welcome, Andrew, who is our Cardiff University representative. If you have a look in my chair's report, you'll see details of Andrew's CV there, but we're very pleased to have Andrew on board. And Andrew's diary hasn't quite yet caught up with his new appointment, so he does have one or two other commitments today, so he might be dipping in and out of the meeting. I'd like to welcome Matthew Bunce to the meeting. Matthew was absolutely no stranger to this meeting, but he has been appointed as our new Executive Director of Finance. So I'd like to congratulate officially Matthew on your appointment and welcome you to the board in your new role. I haven't seen Stephen Allen from Community Health Council. Are you there, Steve? I can have a look at the participants, but we are expecting Stephen Allen and Brenda Chamberlain from the Community Health Council. I can't see Steve Allen in the list of names, and I haven't had apologies. He's usually very good at letting us know if he's not available. David Cogan is here as always as our patient liaison representative, and Kate February, our audit lead performance from Audit Wales. Welcome, Kate, as usual. Joining us during the meeting will be Dr. Hilary Williams, who's a consultant at Velindre Cancer Centre, and Niall Thompson from Buchan Associates, and Phil Hodgson, Deputy Director of Planning and Performance, and Jenny Stock, the Project Manager, who are joining us for item 3.1, which is the Acute Oncology Service Business Case. Also joining us, and I've seen Mary, so I know that she's here, Mary Swiffin Walker, and she's joining us from Shared Services to present the WIBS annual report, which is item 7.1. And is Andrew Paramore here, who's our graduate program trainee, who's should be joining us. I haven't seen Andrew, but Andrew, if you're here.
Sorry, Donna, not today, but he's going to be joining us at a number of committees over the next few months, so people will get to meet him soon.
Oh, okay, sorry, but okay, sorry. So we'd welcome Andrew in due course then. We've in the last 48 hours, we've had to refresh one or two of our papers, mainly for typographical errors. Which some of us who are very eagle-eyed have spotted one or two typographical areas, and we've refreshed one or two papers. So if you haven't refreshed your papers within the last 48 hours, could you do so? I'll give you a chance to do that. We've got a busy agenda today, and we've got two presentations on today's agenda as well as the break to attend the First Minister and the Health Minister's keynote addresses. So can I ask everybody who's leading on agenda items to keep to the time slot that you've been given, please? That would really help us get through our important business that we have before us today. So item 1.3 on the agenda, are there any declarations of interest which are pertinent to the items on today's agenda? No, nobody's hand is up, thank you. So we now come to section 2, which is consent items. And so the consent part of the agenda considers routine committee business as a single agenda item. But if any member wants to bring anything out of consent for discussion, if they could let me know, please. I'm going to, Stephen, are you going to refer to the minutes? Yeah, so Stephen Harris has already alerted us to 6.4 of the minutes, the last bullet point in the list at the top of page 6. Stephen, if I can ask, I'm not going to sort of take it out of consent. I think we can just deal with it here, Stephen. So if you want to explain to us what your concern was about the way that particular minute is recorded.
Yes, just very briefly, thank you, Chair. We've recorded the discussion, which was about the time outpatients wait in the outpatient department between arrival and being seen by a clinician, and very accurately. But we've used the term outpatient waiting time, and I think that generally has a different understanding amongst the public, that normally the public would understand that perhaps to mean the time between being referred by a GP to eventually getting an appointment at a hospital. So I just thought that the wording was a little perhaps ambiguous or misleading, that we need to just clarify that this relates only to the time that our patients are waiting in the outpatient department between arriving there and being seen by a clinician, and not the completely different time they wait from referral to receiving a first appointment. I just thought it was an important clarification to bring out in the minutes.
Thank you, Stephen. So if there are, I can't see any hands up. So we are approving the minutes of the Trust Board held on the 29th of July. We're approving the Chair's urgent action report. And we're approving the commitment of expenditure exceeding the Chief Executive's limits. And under 2.14, we are noting the policies that have been approved since the last report. The 2.15, we are approving the affixing of the trust seal to various documents. And then for noting is the process and the timetable for the 3-year integrated medium-term plan, which we're noting. We note the WISC Joint Committee briefing paper. So those are the consent. That concludes the consent section of our agenda. Can't see any hands up. So we now come to section 3. Is Hilary Williams with us?
Yes, she is, Donna.
Okay, so Hilary, I don't know, is Niall Thompson with you? Phil Hodson and Jenny Stock. I think I've seen Phil.
Yes, we're all here, Chair.
You're all here. Okay, so this paper's come to today's agenda to enable Hilary, who's got a clinic later today, which is why we're taking it at this point in the agenda, to join the meeting to support the presentation. I have read the South East Wales Acute Oncology Service business case, which will be for us to approve. It's a very long and detailed paper, which demonstrates the absolutely phenomenal amount of work which has taken place to bring that business case to this point where it's ready for approval, and has involved working with 3 health boards and other partners to bring it to this point. And I just want to put on record, that fact that this paper represents a huge amount of work and is extremely impressive. And so each health board is receiving an acute oncology service business plan sometime during this autumn, and Velindre and each of the health boards, we're all receiving an acute oncology service business plan during the autumn, and for us that's today. And approving it now, which we hopefully will be able to do at the end of the presentation, will enable the objectives contained in the plan to go forward into the Trust IMTP. So that's just a little bit of context. So Hilary, I don't know if you're leading this, but I'm going to hand over to you, and I presume you would want us to open the presentation at this point.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, here, thank you very much. So I'm Dr. Hilary Williams. I'm a consultant medical oncologist based at Velindre, but it's important to know that I also have a very busy clinical practice where I work with the teams in Nairn and Bevan very closely. And acute oncology has kind of been my passion and very close to my heart for a long time. So I'm beyond delighted to actually see this paper and business case here today. And as our chair has so rightly said, this is a very clear regional collaborative piece of work. So for those of you who are sort of new to acute oncology, I won't go in detail, but essentially acute oncology is when something goes often very seriously wrong in someone's cancer journey. It may be a new diagnosis of cancer, and we know that's still a very significant issue for the UK. And sadly, due to COVID and this issue of stage migration, we're seeing an awful lot of patients more with a diagnosis in the acute setting of metastatic disease. So getting to them quickly is absolutely paramount when we can still treat them. There's another group of patients that are admitted with complications, often of a known cancer. And for them, often they're actually getting towards the end of their life. It may be a point where we're running out of active treatment options, where holistic support, We don't need investigations. What we need is good, holistic, person-centered care and honest conversations with families and the patient to prevent that sort of cycle of readmission that we can often see in this scenario. And then the third group of patients, which is really important, and the ones that perhaps we've got the real expertise at Velindre, is those on active therapy. And if you're on immunotherapy now, you may well be living a number of years with metastatic disease. But if you have a complication and it becomes more significant and we don't look after that quickly and early, you may not get back on that therapy. So recognizing those complications early, getting them back on treatment is absolutely key. So approximately 18 months ago, I mean, acute oncology has been my world for much longer than that. We had some really excellent multi-professional steering workshops. And I think it's a good lesson that we started with this kind of really widespread clinical engagement, very much supported by Matt Bunce, who from finance, and Phil from planning, and a really fantastic team of people that supported us. And I think, you know, I'm not going to dwell on this slide in detail, but it has been a very thorough, very rigorous and very robust process. And I just wanted to acknowledge, as our chair done, the huge commitment of both clinicians, regional clinicians, you know, from people from Merthyr to Chepstow, and also the fantastic support from people like Jenny Stock and Claire, and the finance and planning teams behind this, and also the work that's done on the shop floor by our IOS teams every day. But yeah, absolutely clear, this has been a very rigorous, very involved process. And I think clinicians have really felt part of this, and they feel that you know, if you want to go on to the next slide. And this is the kind of clinical model what we've agreed. And actually, obviously getting a regional case agreed is quite challenging, but actually no clinicians are saying to me that we've got the wrong model. I think what we want to do is we feel that we absolutely focus on the acute services and keeping patients well at home. So wherever possible, they're being managed between this new concept really of same-day emergency care. And Welsh Government are really kind of supporting us with this as well now. So to me, it's all about putting the patient absolutely at the heart of this service. And I think the clinicians on the ground just want to get this done now. We're beginning to work on getting that MUO Cup service up and going. But our remit now is absolutely to implement this, because, you know, that is the thing that's actually going to change patients' lives. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to hand over to Neil.
Thanks, Hilary. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Just before I take you through the next 4 or 5 slides, just a little bit about the role I've played in supporting this really important project. So I've been providing some independent external facilitation and challenge, trying to join together the different perspectives of the stakeholder organisations and also support the development of the business case. But I think just to reiterate the points that Hilary made in her introduction, it's very much been a team effort. I think we've had our challenges along the way, but I think we've ended up with a really robust model and a really sound business case and a really positive engagement process with the health boards. And I think those 3 things brought together put us in a really strong position. I think it's really important to focus on the benefits that will be delivered through the clinical model and the associated investment. And really what this slide here is trying to demonstrate is that the benefits arise predominantly in terms of a better patient experience, as Hilary's alluded to in terms of the clinical model. It allows us to use collective resources in a better way. It's very much about understanding that benefits need to manifest themselves in the staff and the team. This is a people-based service predominantly, but also there are some key digital enablers. I think COVID has helped to accelerate some of that agenda. And I think when brought together, that these bring together a really compelling set of benefits. I think the points at the top there are really important. As Hilary alluded to, the patient is at the centre of decision-making, and the very early work we did around developing the clinical model was very much patient-centric. But also it's entirely consistent with some of the Welsh Government goals around improving emergency care, particularly a much stronger focus on same-day emergency care and ambulatory pathways. It does deliver the service specification for the South East Wales Acute Oncology Service, which again is at the heart of the clinical model. And I think critically, getting down to sort of nuts and bolts, it does deliver economic benefits roughly in a ratio of 2 to 1. So for every £1 we're investing in terms of the service, we're getting back £2 of benefit. And I've got a couple of slides I want to share with you later on just to show how that's built up. Next, please, Jen. So in terms of those benefits, they really arise in 2 different ways. Certainly the measurable benefits. So we anticipate that through the clinical model, we'll avoid patients being admitted into the system because we're focusing much more on ambulatory pathways. But when patients are admitted into the system, with increased oncology presence and increased expertise within the health boards, there are real opportunity to reduce their acute length of stay. And we've been able to put a value on those, both in terms of the number of admissions that we would avoid and the number of bed days that we'd save. And you can see that on the very right hand, when the model's fully implemented by 24-25, there's about £5 million of quantifiable financial benefits. Now, we're not saying those are cash releasing. What we're really saying is they allow resources perhaps to be diverted into other areas. And as I said earlier, that's a benefit to cost ratio of about 2 to 1. Next, please, Jen. In terms of implementation, really important to recognise we're not going to implement the model in a big bang. We're going to implement it in a phased way. And there's 3 phases, and you'll see the scale of the phases here is that a significant proportion of the focus is going to be in phase 1. The various areas of investment are down the left-hand side. Some additional measures which augment what we're doing in phase 1 and phase 2, and then a relatively small component in phase 3, but still bringing some important elements to the table in terms of the full model. And the model will only be fully implemented once they put in place all of those phases. I think the rationale for the phases was twofold. First of all, it was about deliverability, recognising this is a people-based service, and to enhance the service, we need to go out and recruit, and therefore that needs to be done in a phased manner, but also in terms of what the health boards perceive as being affordable from their perspective. I think the key point here, however, is from a Velindre perspective, there's a significant challenge and a significant ask in phase 1, and that's the bullet points right in the middle there. So I think one of the things that really makes the model work and delivers improvement is more specialist oncology support, both delivered physically and virtually within the health boards. Hilary has alluded to the MUO Cup service. Again, that's a key part, and a significant proportion of that support will need to be provided by Velindre, and also the project management expertise. We should never consider this as never forget this is a really complex project, and it needs really professional project management support to make it happen, both within Velindre, but also spreading out into the health boards, and we have made some significant progress. So I think the reason for that is to emphasise a really important and key role for Velindre to play in the very early phases of implementation. Next, please, Jen. And then just in terms of investment, so I've shared with you the benefits. In terms of investment, as I said earlier, it happens across phases. So you can see in 21-22, which is the current financial year that we're in, the level of investment is relatively modest, but it builds up steadily over 22-23, right up to 24-25, with a total level of additional investment into the service of just over 2.5 million. And again, the table at the bottom shows how that investment is spread across the health boards. And that's a really important point here. The investment will take place in the health boards. The resources sit in the health boards. Some of it will be around them employing additional staff locally, but a significant proportion of it will be around them commissioning more resource from Velindre in terms of that specialist expertise. Next, please, Jen. And then just to round off in terms of next steps and progress. So again, as I think the chair alluded to at the beginning, the business case is currently with the health boards for formal approval within their governance processes. We hope that will happen during September, but there may be a small amount of slippage on that. And in terms of the implementation itself, so it is really important that we appoint an SRO to drive the project forward and to bring that to maintain that collective viewpoint that we've built up as the project's developed. We have appointed a project manager, which will be hosted by Velindre. And last but not least, we do need to make sure that the detailed work around the task and finish activities to support the MUO Cup service, to support the enhancement in terms of specialist oncology, the detail of that's worked through both with Velindre and also with the health board, so we can understand in that level of detail how that's going to work on the ground. So, for example, health board A know that on a Monday morning what form of acute oncology presence they're going to have. And then last but not least, we need to make sure that the governance principles that we've developed as part of the business case are embedded and run through the implementation process going forward. So that's all I wanted to say at this stage. Thanks very much.
So just thank you, Niall. There's some more slides. Hilary, are you taking it back now?
I think we were happy to leave the presentation there, because I think we wanted to allow time for questions, Chair. I mean, I think from my point of view, we cannot emphasise the kind of value of this to patients and the need now that we just really want to make that work. And we have started the work on the kind of CUP pathways and the virtual consultant time. So from our point of view, really positive and exciting times. And I think we really have got the clinicians throughout the region behind us, and absolutely, and that's because they know it will make a very real difference to patients every day.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, Niall and Jenny. So if I can open that up for discussion and queries, please. I can't see any hands up. Hilary, can I confirm that this has been approved by CCLG? Oh, Steve, your hand is up, and I guess that's what you were about to ask.
I was just about to confirm a couple of things really to add to the
okay, go on then.
Presentation. One is it has been through the CCLG process and currently going, as mentioned in the presentation, going through governance at health boards. But just two other points really to make. This development responds directly to the Nuffield report from last year, but also in terms of the quality statement that was issued around cancer services in March by Welsh Government, which clearly sets out the requirement for us to work through the delivery of acute oncology services in Wales. So I think it really does match up with the expectations that have been set for us. And I would like to just reaffirm Hilary's comment about the clinical support for this has been immense and really, really important. And over a significant period of time, a lot of input into this to get to this point.
Thank you, Steve. Carl and then Jan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just to add a point to the one that Steve just made, in terms of the Nuffield, this is one of the core recommendations, but also there's a range of others related to unscheduled stroke acute care. And we think that the approval implementation of this business case actually serves quite a range of purposes, and it takes us a long way forward to improving the quality, safety and experience of the unscheduled care system as well. So you essentially get quite a number of benefits across the broader system, and also in inpatient care as well, as we get into sort of phase 2 around in-reach services and the importance of oncology presence within secondary care. So those inpatients who could benefit either from improved care and or reduced admissions. So I think there's a number of factors related to this great piece of work by the team.
Thank you, Carl. Jan?
I just wanted to say, as outgoing Chair of Quality and Safety, what a great achievement this is, and I can see the amount of hard work that's gone into it, but the difference it's going to make to all of our patients at all points in the process. So I think people should be very proud of that, and I'm really pleased that today we're in a position, that my last Quality and Safety meeting, we're in a position where this is going to be finalised, or rather going to be started. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jan. Stephen.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you again. I've sort of been part of watching this develop through the strategy side and the strategy committee side of it. And again, huge congratulations to getting us to this point where we've actually got a feasible way forward and a clear demonstration of benefits to patients. My question was just very quickly whether you wanted to comment at all about any potential impact on our third sector partners, some of the charities that support patients and support us in delivering high quality care, whether this will impact on them or not, and how they've been engaged in this process.
I'm happy to take that, Stephen. Yeah, no, I mean, I think absolutely. And I was actually just thinking I should have mentioned Macmillan because they absolutely have supported acute oncology in Wales and throughout the UK. And actually speaking to I'm kind of a sort of a Macmillan advisor on acute oncology, and speaking to them, they're very much recognising that COVID has really highlighted the challenges for cancer patients in the acute system. So no, they're very much kind of on board with this work. Obviously, they've had a very difficult couple of years. And I think also the funding they put into our assessment unit, I think 3 or 4 years ago now, really demonstrated, and the kind of belief they had that we could deliver same-day emergency care for cancer patients. And also the support for the Probert unit from our own charities have really sort of given us a model to grow from. So I think both those investments were absolutely critical. And, you know, Jenny and the team were all reflecting that actually we do need to kind of make sure going forward we continue to engage Macmillan, and Richard Pugh, I think, is quite good, the head of Macmillan in Wales, of representing kind of other cancer charities. So we need to make sure now we're getting to that implementation phase. And I think around the patient experience, I think it'll be really, really important that we engage, go back to patient bodies again at this point.
Thanks, Hilary. Yeah, you do mention the third sector, and the Community Health Council have been involved in the development of this programme of work. I can't see any other hands up. I've got a query which reflects my NHS background, and I apologise if I'm down in the weeds a little bit. It's a bit of detail. One of the clear messages that I got through, I mean, I've read every one of the 70 pages of the Acute Oncology business case. You can test me if you like afterwards, is to prevent avoidable admissions, and where admissions are necessary, to reduce the number of bed days associated with those admissions. So, and obviously, who can argue with that? It's very, very, very important for the patient and for the NHS. So I'd like some assurance about the weekends, because at one stage in the report, it said we won't, that what you're planning won't cover the weekends. And then a bit later on in the report, it seemed to contradict that a little bit. But it would seem to me that if I'm a patient and I present with whatever my symptoms are on a Friday afternoon at A&E, that I could end up 2 bed days before you know, somebody sees me who can really sort out what my issues are, and that would run counter to what the main ethos of the business case is about. And I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Don. It's a really good point. And I think the UK as a whole is struggling. Can we do AOS 7 days a week? It's a tough one to implement. But one of the key themes that we have is education and upskilling and sharing expertise. So what I would like to feel is, you know, in 18 months, 2 years, you know, myself or one of my colleagues would be well known to the acute teams in the LHB. So they'll know that actually, okay, Dr. X did that with him on Thursday. Okay, it's Saturday today. I've learnt that pathway. We've got a very clear pathway. I can look it up. Actually, I think this patient can go home. There's a hot clinic on Tuesday. There's a big thing in acute medicine called safety netting. And quite often people get kept in because there's no safety net. And I think we're very clear that we need to provide a safety net over the weekends. And with time, you know, we've actually got, you know, internally work at Velindre, we're actually thinking we are needing to sort of step up that to the weekends. But we do have an on-call team available 24/7. And I think we're probably underused at the moment because people don't quite know how to get hold of us. But as we become a lot more prominent, a lot more available, the kind of difference that we can make as oncologists becomes a lot clearer. I think that kind of just, you know, a telephone call at the weekend will be used a lot more, because personally I think it's underused. So really good point. I think a 24/7 service is a challenge, but I think we absolutely have to make sure there's robust mechanisms out of hours, that patients aren't just kept in hospital waiting, which is currently what happens.
Hilary, I was just going to add that we did, in considering the options, we did get data to look at the profile of admissions across the working week, and there was definitely a dip at the weekend, and therefore we felt, in terms of getting best value for money and ensuring resources were targeted in the most appropriate place and that the overall solution was affordable, we focused it on a Monday to Friday service. But I think Hilary's right, that doesn't mean there isn't access to support over the weekend.
Yeah, thanks, Niall. Of course, if I'm the one person who, you know, comes in on a Friday evening, you know, the value for money falls. Argument falls then if I'm the one person who happens to present on a Friday evening. So I'm assured by your response, Hilary. So thank you very much for that. My second point, and again, this one might show that I don't understand the services perhaps as well as I could. I note the number of additional consultants that are needed and for what purpose. but our consultants, I'm talking about Velindre here, are experts in site-specific cancers. And so there's certainly not enough additional consultants to cover all the site-specific cancers. And I'm just wondering how the cover in the health board will work across the whole spectrum of cancer pathways that may need to be addressed.
Yeah, Donna, absolutely fantastic question. I think the GMC noted this about 4 years ago. And I think there's noticed that oncology training was actually becoming too site specific. And essentially they really challenged the oncology colleges and said, look, you guys have got to deliver. Our patients in 5-10 years now need oncologists that can manage acute oncology and that are also up to date in acute medicine. I think when I was a young trainee, I kind of did that and training's changed. So the curriculum now is stating that. And I think with the advent of things like immunotherapy that are, you really need that kind of acute medical expertise sharing with oncology expertise, that's sort of bringing that up agenda again. So I think we do have to sort of almost retrain. There's a group of us that perhaps have a bit of an interest in that. And the way we're going to realistically do it is by trying to provide some consistent virtual support. In addition, we hope to delivering in the health boards. That's a challenge with staffing. But one thing we've learned from COVID is actually we've all got much better at Teams and all those sort of things. And actually having one oncologist in every one of those health boards 7 days a week or 5 days a week is absolutely impossible. So some sort of more modern ways of working, but I still do think we do need some people on the shop floor as well. But no, absolutely, we need to make sure our trainees are ready for these posts. And I think we need fellowships, we need training roles where they can actually subspecialize in this.
Thank you. Thanks, Hilary. Those are the two questions that I had. I can't see any other hands up. And I mean, I did pick up those two questions, but I have to commend you on the attention to detail that is apparent throughout this report. Which, as I said in my opening remarks, is extremely impressive, all 70 pages of it. Hopefully, our health board colleagues will be in a position to approve it this autumn. As it's the last day of September today, I don't think it's going to happen by the end of September, but I know that there are plans in place in the coming weeks for the paper to appear at the various health boards. So, is there anything else, Hilary or Niall, that you wanted to say before I ask the board if they wish to approve the Acute Oncology Service Business Plan?
No, I think the attention to detail probably is a huge thanks to Jenny, who's worked seamlessly behind the scenes. And so, no, she's absolutely fantastic on that attention to detail and professional support we've had from her.
So, board colleagues, we're asked to approve the Acute Oncology business plan. Can I ask for a show of hands, please? Hands up if we approve. I think that's unanimous from IMs. Carl, you didn't put your hand up. Thank you. All right, couldn't see it. So, and Alan's hands. So we approve the Acute Oncology business plan. And just before you leave us, Hilary, and because I know you've got a clinic to go to, thank you for the steadfast way in which you've taken this issue such a long way in what is a relatively short time. It is less than a year since we received the Nuffield report. I know you were thinking along these lines anyway, but it's still less than a year since we received a very firm recommendation from the Nuffield report. So to be here today in September approving this business case is a source of great pleasure, I think, for this board. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Steve, before I move on.
Just to thank the team, actually, because there's been some hard yards in this, but it's a huge step, huge step. I think I talked earlier about how it meets some of the expectation on us all, but more importantly, the thing that struck me isn't the benefits in the business case, it's the fact that there would be patients who will not be in hospital beds for 33,000 days if we deliver all this. And that's not from the economic benefits. It's actually people don't want to be in hospital. So I think that's the huge thing for me in terms of the delivery of this case.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so I expect you'll be leaving us now, Hilary, because you've got a clinic, and Niall and Jenny. I'm going to take us back to the agenda, and we need now to turn to the action log from the board meeting held on the 29th of July. There are just two actions on the log. First one is the risk register, and of course that appears under section 8 on our agenda today. And then the audit committee highlight report, which is about the concern there was private patients' deaths to be a standing item on the committee highlight report. And we're noting that's not closed yet, but there is a paper, Martin, as I understand it, due to come to audit on the 14th of October. And then we will receive a highlight report following that, which will set out the conclusions that you make at audit committee.
That's right, Chair. Whether we conclude the matter in our October meeting is another matter, but we do have a report has been commissioned by our outgoing Director of Finance, which Matt no doubt will be picking up. We'll have a chat ahead of audit. Well, that's progressing. I don't think we're going to be concluding in the next few weeks, but we'll make sure it's kept on the agenda. But
you will include a report as to where you've got to in your highlight report to us.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So, are there any matters arising anybody wants to draw to my attention from the minutes which are not contained in the action log? I can't see any hands up. We're making good time. It's I think we're due to stop at 11, so I think I will take the chair's update report and hopefully the chief exec's report prior to us logging off to join the NHS Confed. Lauren, is that okay?
Yes, agreed. I think it'd be a good time to do those.
So providing Steve and I don't talk for too long, we'll be all right there. So can I introduce, please, my chair's report to you? This comes under 6.1. It's a very busy report, and there's some things to be proud of in the report. I've prepared for you just a list of the things that we've discussed in board briefing sessions, so that the public are aware of the issues that we're grappling with. We've had our AGM toward the end of July, in which we fulfilled our statutory duties with the various reports that we have to present to the public. And it was a very moving meeting as well, because we had two renowned poets to open and close the meeting, and both poems were written about the NHS during COVID. And one was Max Boyce, who read for us his poem "And Only the Tide Went Out," and the national poet for Wales, Ifor ap Glyn, wrote a poem specially for the event. And you might think that's a strange thing to do, but though both of those poems affirmed the work of our staff, and I think that's important, and under a kind of health and well-being sort of heading, really, that we commissioned a poem from the national poet for Wales as a way of affirming our staff for the load that they have borne on our behalf during the worst days of COVID. Those worst days have lasted 18 months to nearly 2 years, by the way. As I said, we're welcoming Professor Andrew Westwell, and there's some details there about Andrew and his CV. Jan, you are irreplaceable, but we are going to try and replace you, and that process is underway. And I'll keep the board updated when we have made an appointment. But it goes without saying, Jan, that your contribution to this board over the last 9 years has been absolutely immense. so many of us have benefited from your wise counsel, from the broad range, the very broad range of skills and expertise that you bring to the board, and we will miss you, but we wish you well. I note the correspondence I received from the Health Minister, which outlines the new posts in her department, which is Julie Morgan as the Deputy Minister, and Lynn Neagle, which is a kind of new ministerial portfolio within the Health Minister's team. And Lynn Neagle focuses on mental health, and we've met Lynn and Julie a few times in their new roles. Our Macmillan funded welfare rights team, who are also part funded by our own charity, they're part of the supportive care team. They have for the 3rd year running been awarded the advice quality standard, you know, and to achieve that 3rd year running during COVID, I would just like to put on record, as I've done in this report, my congratulations and thanks to the team. I'm so delighted and impressed, I have to tell you, the Zero Surveillance is the 1st year anniversary of that initiative, which we have briefed the board on previously. But if you note that we've supplied over 20,000 samples to Public Health Wales for analysis, you know, that's just astonishing achievement. The therapy assessment unit's been shortlisted for the Macmillan Excellence Awards. We noticed that funding's been achieved for a PhD for Velindre, one of our clinical scientists in radiation protection services. I think that's also very promising. We've got an individual shortlisted, Diane Rees, in the RCN Nurse of the Year Awards. 10th of November, that will be announced. I was very pleased to represent the Trust at the Graig Bike Ride on the 4th of September. And I was present to wave the riders off and to welcome them back after what was either a 40, a 60 or 100 kilometre ride. And as of the 3rd of September, £60,000 was raised as a consequence of that ride and a dinner the evening before. And that will be split between the mission to seafarers and Velindre. So that was excellent. And then the most inspirational section, I think, of this report of mine was that on the 20th of September, Steve Ham and I were delighted to welcome Mr. Malcolm Evans and his wife, Eileen, in order to thank Mr. Evans, who was donating his 152nd unit of blood to the Welsh Blood Service. He's been donating for over 61 years. His first donation was in July 1960, and we were able to present him with a specially commissioned pin that had 150 inscribed on the front of the pin. And we had to specially commission it because no one's ever achieved that level of donation before, in recognition of his incredible support to the service. We know he's the longest serving blood donor in Wales because no one has reached the 150 milestone previously. Our research suggests that he could be the longest serving blood donor in the UK, but I think the team over in WBS are still trying to see if that, how accurate that is. But given that each blood donation has the potential to save 3 lives, you know, that's absolutely phenomenal. And Steve Ham and I walked away from that event walking on air, I think it's fair to say, after meeting such an inspirational man who fully intends into his 80s to carry on donating. I don't know if you want to say anything about that particular aspect, Steve.
He was inspirational, actually. It was quite easy to, it was a very engaging session that we had with him. I'm very unassuming about his commitment to it, but actually his motivation and the encouragement that he was giving to his family to donate was quite exceptional, actually.
Well, it's just amazing. And so, Andrew, I'd like to thank your team and Simon and others for setting up that event so that Steve and I could be present. It was our privilege and our honour to be there. Are there any questions for me on that report? which is for noting. Thank you. I think, Steve, we can just squeeze you in.
Okay, I won't go through everything. Just a couple of things for me to highlight on there and add a little bit to. I note in my report about the joint escalation intervention, which was really happily received, that we remain in routine arrangements. But just to add to that, we did have a joint exec team meeting with the government senior team last Friday afternoon, which went really very well. Well, that's an understatement. It went really well, it went very well indeed. We had a great feedback from the team down in Welsh Government. We considered where we'd been over the last year in terms of responding to COVID, our plans for this year, and how we're resetting the recovery plans are forming in terms of the coming years for the organisation. And we'll come back to that last part of the board's development session in October and in November. They really did want us to pass on their thanks to everybody working in the organisation for their commitment, flexibility and the innovation that they've shown through the last 18 months in responding to COVID. And I wanted to record that here as part of the feedback we got from the joint exec team meeting. We will get a letter which we'll share with the board when we receive it, and you'll see that in coming months. Just one other thing, you know, there in the report that we've begun the competitive dialogue. You'll also be aware that the judicial review process is still ongoing. The judge made a ruling last week in terms of not approving it to go forward, but there will be a pre-process which is being put in place at the moment on that, and you'll have seen some things in the press this week around that item. And lastly, I just want to add my thanks to Donna and welcome to Matt joining the team this week. Physically moved offices as well, Matt, already settled in, and welcome, and looking forward to working with you as part of the team over the coming years. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions for Steve? Thank you, Steve. Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's really helpful. Just a couple of things that are on you, which I could do with a little bit more detail on, perhaps, is the blood collection supply issues. You mentioned that we're managing supply issues. Has the issue gone away, or is it still a issue we're going to have to continue managing? And is it causing any issue, any impact on our daily
we have to be careful about using them. I mean, Paul might want to come in down to the cancer centre, but it's not. The position is stabilising and improving as supply increases. I mean, Alan's all over the supply side of this in terms of managing that. Blood service continues. Supplies, we got stock. It hasn't really impacted us hugely, but we have managed it positively as well.
Good, that's good news. Thank you.
Okay, so we note, thanks Steve for your report, and we note that. And so now we're going to log off. Can I just ask Lauren, do colleagues, when we return at 12:30, do they just use the same link?
Yes, back in the same link.
Okay, so thank you for your attention so far, and we look forward to welcoming you all back at 12:30. Croeso nôl pawb. Welcome back, everyone. We have taken the opportunity to listen to the keynote address of both the First Minister and the Health Minister, and some of us will have an opportunity to reflect on those presentations later on this afternoon. We now come to section 7 on the agenda, which is quality, safety and performance. And we have an annual report on the Wales Infected Blood Support Service, that's WIBS, annual report. We would normally take an annual report in the consent agenda, but this is the first time that we've had an annual report from the WIBS service. So Mary Spiffin-Walker, welcome back, Mary,
Thank you.
Has agreed to give a presentation, which I think might help members of the board, particularly the IM members, become better acquainted with the WIBS service through the presentation that you're going to give us, Mary. So if I can hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. Apologies for any noise in the background. Building work has just started next door, so I'll try and keep it brief. You've seen the report. I'm Mary Swiffle-Walker. I took up the post of the WIBS manager in August 2017, just before our scheme went live in the November. I previously worked for Welsh Government for 34.5 years. Obviously 2021 was a challenging year for everybody. For some of our beneficiaries it was particularly challenging because they were having to shield as a result of their hepatitis C or their HIV status. I'm sure you all know, but our scheme deals with the people that were affected with hepatitis C and or HIV back in the 80s and 90s as a result of treatment by NHS Wales. In 2016, it was decided that people would be looked after by the health bodies in the countries that they were infected in. So not all our beneficiaries live in Wales, but they were all infected in Wales. As I say, in some respects it was quiet for us because we weren't out, the welfare team were not out doing home visits and beneficiary checks, so they continue to do those things online where they could. The age of some of our beneficiaries meant that Zoom meetings and things like that were not something they were comfortable with or able to do, but we maintained our service. We did business as usual as much as we could through telephone calls. We also reached out to beneficiaries that we don't have much contact with because some people just carry on and they don't really want to interact with us, but we did reach out to all of the people on our scheme just to check that they were okay and whether they wanted anything from us. The two main issues that we were dealing with through 2020-21 were parity and the infected blood inquiry and providing Rule 9 advices for that. So with regard to parity, for those of you who don't know the background, when our scheme was set up in 2017, we were very similar to the scheme that was being operated in England and Northern Ireland. Scotland did something slightly differently. At the beginning of the financial year 2019-20, Theresa May announced a large sum of money which enabled the English scheme to put their rates up quite significantly. The funding wasn't available to Welsh Government to meet the same rates, and therefore our beneficiaries felt particularly aggrieved about the fact that you know, people with the same level of stage, if they were hepatitis stage 1, they were getting £14,000 less per year than if they had been infected in England. And obviously that's caused a lot of upset to our beneficiaries. So we were in constant contact with Welsh Government, who obviously, you know, understood the issues, but without the funding weren't able to do anything about it. So in March, 25th of March 2021, the then Health Minister Vaughan Gethin made a statement. Agreement had been reached with the 4 nations that parity would be achieved, and then they set about working out the finer detail of that. So I'm pleased to report that eventually in August of 2021 we had the revised directions from Welsh Government which allowed us to pay the same rates as those in the other 3 schemes. All schemes now are paying the same rates. It was an immense amount of work for myself and my finance colleague to work out what people had already had, what they were entitled to. Some of the payments were backdated to 2019 and some of the payments were backdated to the start of our scheme in 2017. So it was a big piece of work. We were all supposed to move together, the 4 nations. England paid some of their payments before we did, which of course resulted in a lot of calls about why we hadn't done it yet, but we didn't have the directions to do it. And then Scotland made some payments again ahead of us. But we can now say that we have made all the payments. So every payment that was due, where we've had the information to pay them, have been paid. So we're now ahead of the game at last. All our beneficiaries have had everything they are owed and are now on the same rates as the other 4 schemes. The second piece of work for us was the infected blood inquiry. We dealt with, I think it was 3 or 4 Rule 9 requests where they write to us asking what we do, how we administer the scheme, etc. And Alison Ramsey, who is my boss, she's the Director of Performance Planning and Informatics at Shared Services, actually appeared in front of the inquiry in May, which obviously involved an awful lot of briefing. She was relatively new to the post, so it was, again, a very intense period, making sure that she had the answers to all the questions that they might possibly ask her. And she went straight after Vaughan Gethin for the inquiry and acquitted herself particularly well. And the inquiry seemed very pleased with what we were doing and how we were doing things. As a result of preparing for the infected blood inquiry, we did notice there was some minor discrepancies with our staff guidance, and the scheme not operating. We weren't operating in the way that perhaps our staff guidance said we would, because we'd improved the service, but we hadn't gone back and updated our documentation. So as a result of attendance at the infected blood inquiry, we now have a programme of work for this year where we're going to review all our documents, all our guidance, our applications, our website, to make sure that they reflect all the changes as a result of parity and that they are all consistent across the board. And so that piece of that work plan is going to be fed to the next governance group, which Lauren sits on, and we will be working on it, as I say, for this year, with a view to completing it by the end of this financial year. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try and answer. Sorry, you're on mute, Donna.
First time today that I've done that. So I just want to say thank you, Mary, for your report. Are there any queries? No, not too rushed at all. Any queries or observations, colleagues, that you want to make, or any questions for Mary? Martin.
Yeah, Mary, thanks for that as always.
I knew you would, Martin.
we worked together many years ago. So the two kind of takeaways from it are that people who've been infected in Wales are at no more disadvantage than elsewhere in the UK, and I think you've covered that off. And the other thing, just to check, is about funding. All the funding for the entire scheme is to the Welsh Government, so it's entirely neutral upon shared services and upon the rest of the health service.
It is, yes, it is. And I think that was the slight issue, the delay in us actually implementing the changes. The funding letter that Welsh Government received from the UK Government wasn't clear that it funded it going for the future, as they've made. The wording was not as Welsh Government wanted it to be. So they raised a challenge on that, and then they received another letter then, which gave them the assurance that the funding is ongoing.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Mary.
And I think, Mary, if you could just say a few words about the support. You mentioned some of the difficulties during COVID with the support team. Is the support that is offered in the Welsh service, is that replicated across the UK? And as well as that, just tell us a little bit about the support service that you provide.
Okay. First of all, currently, no, it isn't, and certainly not in the way that we provide it. I guess the advantage of Wales is that we are a relatively small country, so we provide a bespoke service. We employ 2 welfare rights advisors who provide advice on benefits. They'll help our beneficiaries fill in PIP forms, and I can't remember what PIP stands for now, but it's benefit, universal credit forms. They previously, prior to the pandemic, would attend any interviews with people if they wanted them to, and they provide a very personalised one-to-one service. Also, they will help our beneficiaries if they want to apply for one of our small grants that we offer. They will help them fill in the forms, etc., as I say, some of our beneficiaries are quite elderly and they're not particularly techy, shall we put it that way. And the two girls will help them to fill in the forms. I should also mention that Donna said this morning about Velindre Macmillan welfare rights receiving the AQS. Our two welfare rights girls were involved in that process for the first time this year and have also achieved the AQS as a result of that. So that was a result for us. We also provide a psychology service, that came online at the end of 2019. So we have a consultant psychologist part-time and a psychologist as well, and they are helping people with their mental health issues that they've had, sometimes as a result of treatment, often at the moment as a result of everything being brought back to the fore because of the infected blood inquiry. People are reliving their experiences. Some of the stories that we hear on a day-to-day basis are quite horrific, and sometimes almost unbelievable that you can't believe this happened. Both of the psychologists have experience in dealing with this subject matter. So feedback we've had has been very good, where our beneficiaries have said that they don't feel that they need to take people back to square one because they feel that the two ladies understand it and don't need all the back history, the backstory, because they just feel that they can just share their story, and we've had really good positive response to that. The other schemes at the moment will pay for people to go and see a private psychologist. Because of parity, the other schemes are now having to look at introducing systems similar to ours. It's obviously a more difficult thing for England to do, but they're going to have to look at whether they can do it or not.
Thank you, Mary. I did attend a few days when the public inquiry, infected blood public inquiry, met in Cardiff. That's got to be about 2-3 years. Well, if it was pre-COVID, it was probably good 2 years ago now.
2018, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah, I did attend that, and you're quite right. Some of the stories are absolutely harrowing of what individuals have experienced as a consequence of infected blood and their treatment and management and so on. So I'm really proud that we've got a support service in Wales to help those individuals who need the support. And as I've got a family member who needs to fill in certain PIP forms and so on, and crikey, sometimes I think you need to be a lawyer at least to be able to complete some of those. I'm so pleased that that service is available in Wales. If you're feeling unwell, if you're feeling under pressure, if you're feeling whatever you're feeling, those forms are not what you want to be faced with. So I'm really proud that we've got such a service in Wales. I'm really pleased.
I'm very proud to manage it.
Thank you, Mary. Jan.
Thanks, Mary. I'm really pleased to hear how the scheme is going. My experience of redress schemes is extensive, and it's based on child sexual abuse, adults who were victims as children in all sorts of arenas, whether it be in sport or in religion or in education. And the one takeaway that I've learned from that is transparency. That any scheme just has to be transparent so that people don't feel that they're being managed, because for some people going through the whole process of gaining redress or gaining compensation, they can describe it as worse than the actual incidents that happened to them. So I'm really pleased to hear how professionally this has been delivered. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Jan. Thank you very much. I can't see any other hands up. You've waited a long time to give us this report. I mean, this morning now, because you joined us right at the very start, Miriam. I'm sorry we have kept you waiting.
No, that's fine.
As I said, this is the first time that we've received an annual report. We've had some updates, but this is the first time we've had an annual report. and our responsibility is to note, thank you for preparing it and to note its contents, and to anticipate that there will be future annual reports from this service going forward. And you mentioned the corporate governance, the governance group, and our Lauren Fear chairs that governance group. So perhaps, Lauren, we could ask you for a sort of half-yearly update if there's anything to report, and then we'll have another, our second annual report roughly a year from now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we were suggesting for this year, given the public interest as well, and the number of actions that we're currently working on as a result. So yeah, absolutely.
So we understand now your forward work program for the year, and by when you hope to accomplish that forward work program. We were able to see how far you've got when you report next year, and if necessary, Lauren, we can have a half-yearly update from you in your capacity as chair of the governance group. So thank you, and thank you, Mary, for that. You're welcome to stay with us, but if you're busy, you could. You're also welcome to leave us at this point.
Thank you. I'll probably leave. I've got a number of calls lined up.
I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
7.2 on the agenda is the highlight report from the last Quality, Safety and Performance meeting, which Stephen Harris chaired as Jan was on leave, I think, at the time. So Stephen, can I ask you to introduce us to this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, a big thank you to Jan for all of her many years of service, and particularly sterling service in chairing QSP and all of its predecessor committees. And it was a great shame you weren't there and able to join us for the last meeting, but certainly your long influence continued and will continue through that meeting and into future meetings. So thank you. So as I say, I prepared this highlight report. I'll just pick out a few key things from advise. Perhaps the most important part of the meeting we benefited from was at the very start with our patient story, a video obviously prepared with the permission and approval of the patient, which took us along a journey, a story of one of our patients and their interaction with our staff and facilities. Again, often these things are very moving, but they're always inspiring as we are reminded about the achievements that our staff are able to deliver in terms of care and, of course, quality of life. Along with that, we noted the inclusion of obviously the practical things to learn from these stories, and in particular the mapping of the patient story against the 6 different domains of quality that we measure these things against, and of course the ongoing challenge of care as we are hopefully coming out of this pandemic and sustaining very high quality of care in new arrangements. And we noted as well that some teams are already starting to see quite significant increases in patient numbers, breast and colorectal are mentioned there. We then also received the Shared Services Quality and Safety Governance Report. At the previous meeting of Quality and Safety, this had been requested, so colleagues from Shared Services attended and presented a governance report to us. And again, that will become a regular feature of Quality and Safety Committee going forward. And we also received an equality update. And later on in the agenda, I think it's item 8.6, Carl will be showcasing his role as an equality ambassador. We've identified equality ambassador roles for each of the executives. I won't take us through every item under assure, but I will pick out the 15-step challenge report, which we received as a committee. Again, this is around, in the most literal sense, visiting an area and assessing all the positives, of which there were very many, and of course if there are areas for improvement, a number of those were identified. But again, the message coming back about the very positive attitude of our staff in very, very difficult circumstances. So again, big thank you to the staff for that. Clearly 1 or 2 areas for improvement, and again an assurance to the committee that those things are being looked at and are being worked on by the various teams. So I'll pause at that point. If people have any questions or comments on any of these, I will try and answer, and I will, of course, look to exec colleagues as appropriate if we need to get into any more detail.
Thank you, Stephen. Nicola, do you want to add anything to that before I open it to up to the board?
No, Chair. You know, it was a very good meeting. We are doing further work to refine and further develop the comprehensive committee. Colleagues would remember it's a committee that's been running now since November of last year, where we brought together a number of previous committees. So we are in the process of evaluating and reviewing the committee and will be making appropriate changes. We have already made some suggested changes to the work plan, which were approved at the meeting. So it's starting to really develop and enable us to start triangulating performance, finance and quality outcomes together in the one meeting.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm particularly taken with the idea that going forward, for the divisional reports, but they're being structured under the headings of the 6 domains of quality, which you introduced us to at the last board development session, I think it was. So that will really give us a framework that will ensure consistency in terms of what we're reporting and how we're comparing progress and so on. So I was very pleased to note that.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments that colleagues wish to make? Can't see any hands up. Therefore, we note the thank you, Stephen, for stepping in there. We note the report and what's been presented to us. And finally, Jan, just to spare your blushes, you're going to be very hard shoes to fill when you leave us, but we will do our best. And I just wanted to say, I note that I haven't read it yet, but I did ask Jan at a one-to-one we had recently if she would prepare a legacy report so that we could hand that over to whoever does try and fill Jan's shoes as chair of this committee in due course. I note that that's been received, Jan, but I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet, but I still want to thank you for sending that in. Okay, so the next one is me. The next item on the agenda is the Remuneration Committee highlight report. And colleagues, you'll notice there are 2 highlight reports because there was the normal committee meeting, which was held on the 26th of August. And then we had to have, if I've got that right, and then we needed an extraordinary committee on the 23rd of September, just in order to quickly get through one of the issues that we were addressing. We thought we would have an extraordinary meeting of the Remuneration Committee to sign off an issue that we were dealing with. So if there are any questions on either of those reports, I'd be pleased to receive them and probably hand it over to Sarah to respond. But are there any comments anybody wants to make about the Remuneration Committee papers, the 2 highlight reports? No, if not, so we note the contents of both reports and the actions being taken. And then the next item on the agenda, 7.4, is the Local Partnership Forum highlight report, which Sarah, I'll hand over to you to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Local Partnership highlight report of the meeting that took place on the 1st of September. And we can see here a number of items were discussed. It was a wide and varied agenda, and there was a good discussion. And also just bring to the board's attention that this was the last meeting that Darren Dupre, Unison Regional Officer, will be attending, as he has handed over his duties for this branch to his colleague Joe Donnelly, who will be working with us in the future. So just picking up one item actually of particular note in respect of partnership working. We did discuss at the LPF a series of workshops we're arranging with the Involvement and Participation Association, and this is on the back of work that they've done at national level with Welsh Government, working with trade unions and NHS managers to actually get underneath the concepts of partnership working and then build and develop ongoing improvements
Have you frozen, Sarah?
Yeah,
I think she has. We lost Sarah.
Should we come back to it?
Donna, should we come back to it and move to the next
item?
I
was just wondering if she was trying to get back in. I've no idea what's
I suspect she is.
there. Okay. Yeah.
Ah, she's back.
Yeah, I won't take questions because I'd have to hand them over to Sarah to answer anyway. So we'll move to
Sorry, Chair.
Donna.
Oh, there you are. There you are. Okay. Hi, Sarah. We lost you.
Sorry. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions or queries for Sarah? Steve, I think your hand is up.
Yeah,
and then Martin.
Just add my thanks to the note that Sarah made about Darren's contribution over the years. I met with him this week and personally thanked him as well. So he's made an impact with us and supported our partnership working and helped us build over a number of years. And I can't remember exactly how many years he's been doing that, but he's been a real support to help us on our partnership journey.
He's been a support and he's been a source of challenge, which is appropriate and as it should be. So yeah, and I think I need to drop a note to Darren as well, Steve. But thank you for seeing him at the end of his tenure. So we note that report. Thank you, Sarah. And now we come to 7.5, which is delivering excellence performance report for the period up to July 2021. And Martin, you had your hand up and I forgot to call you in.
I was just about to send a message through to Sarah instead. Just my question was going to be, Donna. Sarah, thanks. It's a really helpful report. I just wondered where we are in terms of Agile working policy. Obviously, we've approved some policies today and it wasn't there, so I'm presuming it's still in development. Will that be coming to us sometime soon?
Thank you, Martin. That's a really good question. So we've got a project underway around Agile working. There's actually an engagement session happening, a couple of engagement sessions happening with staff around the development of the policy. We're also then running a workshop with the Executive Management Board and senior leadership teams to make sure that the policy lands in a place that the organisation is comfortable with. So you're absolutely right, the policy itself is not finalised yet, so it will be coming through our normal governance arrangements in a couple of months' time.
And that's very important because that policy has to work for the organisation, but also has to work for staff as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, for that. I think so many organisations are doing this now, aren't they? For which COVID has brought this to the forefront, that there can't just be a free for all post COVID. There needs to be a policy which kind of safeguards both the organisation and its employees. So I'm very pleased to see that work progressing. No more hands up. So if I could take us to 7.5 and ask Alan Prosser and Paul Wilkins are here to represent Kath today. And so can I invite you to take us through this report, which I'm trying to call up. Are you first, Alan?
I've got the running of the report is Velindre Cancer Centre first, so I was just going to suggest Paul maybe start and I'll come in behind him just in terms of the running order.
Oh yeah, I've got the cancer one up first, you're quite right. Okay, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So broadly looking at the July performance as an overview. So 6 targets reporting as red against in excess of 30, so largely positive. Of the 6, 3 of those are the new Clinical Oncology Subcommittee cost targets in radiotherapy, which I'll just remind ourselves what they are. There's one in the outpatient sector, which is the 30-minute target. One is on news scores for sepsis, and one then for healthcare associated infections. Just a reminder on COSC though, these are the targets introduced. And you'll see within the report that we are both reporting COSC and the Royal College of Radiologists RCR targets. And the assurance there, hopefully, for you is that our patients aren't waiting any longer than they have been to this point. It's just that the RCR is what all of our systems are set up around and easier to extract the information. It starts to become a manual trawl then when we get into the COSC targets. So we welcome the COSC targets, actually, is that they are going to be stretch targets and difficult targets to achieve, and therefore likely going to need some redesign of our system, definitely some different ways of meeting efficiencies, but also I think there's a different conversation requirement with our commissioners that because of the significant reduction in time that a patient is going to need to wait, that clearly there's going to be additional resource required within the system. So that's the backdrop, if you like. And I think when you look at the report, what you actually see is Velindre compare equally with the other cancer centres across Wales, which indicates that this isn't something simplistically within Velindre's gift. It is a wider system review requirement. When we then come on to radiotherapy waiting times, just to give you a feel there, in July we saw 345 patient referrals received, which is an increase on June where there were 323. I've already alluded to COSC creating that challenge for us, and we've started to look at filling additional surge posts within, well, we have started to fill them as opposed to looking at it within radiotherapy and radiotherapy physics, which are all areas which are coming under pressure. And I think what we're also seeing is the complexity of planning now is starting to create some difficulty for us within radiotherapy services as we move into a response to COVID from things like hypofractionation. That kind of physics planning is becoming more and more difficult. So we've undertaken a pilot within head and neck, and that has been relatively positive, meeting the 21-day target, and that we're trying to cascade the learning out from that point. It's worth noting within radiotherapy services that the overall performance is relatively strong against a backdrop with COVID of 25% reduction in radiotherapy capacity, and that's due to infection control measures and staff isolating and the like. So we still find ourselves in and around that. So against that backdrop, largely positive. SAC waiting times, you'll see excellent performance in and around that area at 99.7%. Performance with just one patient breaching the target, and that's against record volumes. So what we see within SAC services now is we are getting very, very close to the new referral numbers back up to COVID, pre-COVID numbers, and our internal demand. So those patients who are living longer, who are back in for repeat cycles, is getting bigger, which is good news for patient outcomes. And then presents that challenge to us to maintain that going forward when we see quite large demand numbers coming into the system. So that's up about 17% internally as we currently stand. When we move on to the second part of SAC, and that is the patients that are seen within 5 days. Our average previously was seen around about 4 patients a month. That's now up to 10. So the general feel overall is, as you can imagine, there is a pressure within that system growing, and one that we're responding to. We're actively running that through Velindre Futures. The backdrop to all of that is, of course, our staff are working incredibly hard, and some are being moved from some of the other roles to focus on the patient delivery area. And we as a senior leadership team in the background are working on any of those gaps that might arise because of that. Moving you on then to outpatients. So that's a steady target. We're in and around 76%. And that's for the 30-minute target. One of the things I think we've spoken about before, and we'll raise again now, is that target is very much about the patient arriving at our outpatients to see the consultant. Of course, during COVID, we took on all phlebotomy services across that South East Wales for cancer patients, which means that when the patient comes in and has phlebotomy first, inevitably there's a delay whilst the blood picture is reported to get into the actual consultant, inevitably causing these kind of performance metrics. Going forward, we're going to split that down so we get a more accurate figure. In respect of then repatriating that phlebotomy, we're in discussions with each of the health boards to move those services back as quickly as possible and align them really with our outreach clinics. So that's the direction of travel there. In respect of therapies, so there was small delays there due to some staff sickness. So those patients will be seen within 2 weeks. Overall, the 3 patients that breached were then seen on the first day after that. So they were the first day of week 3. No harm was recorded in that respect. Our outpatient DNA rates are within target, but we are actively monitoring them. What we have seen is they've generally been 2 to 3%. They're now in and around the 5% mark. So we aren't taking things for granted, and there's some work going on within the outpatient department to try and assess what that move is, what's the cause of that move to get into the 5% area. What we don't want to do is to get clearly beyond that point. So trying to take a proactive approach in respect to that performance. Pressure ulcers, and there were nothing reported again this month, which is a real success story, I think, in respect of what's going on in that area. But there was one healthcare associated infection with C. diff. A full root cause analysis is currently being undertaken. A full multidisciplinary team panel is meeting, and there were results expected in September for that. Clearly, no one report that, as this is the July output. The other area, I think, which was something that's been on the agenda for a while, was the SAC 36-hour pre-prescribing compliance. There's been a 70% increase in that performance. It's now up around the 84% margin, and continued work is going on in that area. I'm happy to take any questions beyond that point.
Thanks, Paul. So for the SAC 36-hour, just because you ended on that, there's now a prompt that is automatically generated, is there, that goes out to the relevant consultant to remind them that they have to get the prescribing done, and that's having an effect.
Yeah, so we piloted that, and now it's been an automated system. It had good effect with that 70% increase. It's become an automated system. The key clearly is keeping an eye on that to ensure that performance sustains.
Thank you, Paul. Any comments or queries or observations for Paul? Martin.
Not really a question, but just an observation, really. I mean, I think this element of the performance report has come on leaps and bounds. So, Paul, congratulations on the work you put in this. It's eminently readable. I understood the issues before you had to explain them. I think it's a terrific testimony to the work that's been done to actually make this very, some of these things are quite technical, but the explanation of what's red and what's green and reasons why is terrific. I'm really happy.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I would agree with that. It's been improving with each board meeting, in the sense that we can understand better what's going on, and what this report is painting a picture of is increased activity and decreased capacity due to COVID and some staffing issues and so on, and that within that context, this is the performance. And I note that you are recruiting staff to increase the capacity, but you will still have the issue in radiotherapy in particular, where cleaning and social distancing will reduce the number of radiotherapy sessions in a day.
Indeed,
I can't see any hands up. I've got a query, Paul, which might seem critical, but I'm just looking for a date, really. This is the second board meeting where we've been told that the cost targets have not been put into electronic form so they can be monitored in that way. And I just wondered, have you got, I'm not wanting to put any pressure on you in particular, but have you got a date by which you think that you'll have the cost card targets in electronic form so that we can report on them?
I've asked similar, actually. It's a concern area for the organisation. The complexity is huge because this is only counting the when the IRMA is created within radiotherapy, which is a key part of the digital health and care records piece of work and the CANISC replacement. So there's not an easy answer to this right now about how quickly that can get done, because there's so much going on in and around that digital area. What we are doing is actively working in and amongst that with the team to progress that as quickly as possible. There's a second order piece as well to this. This will only form part of a bigger single cancer pathway review as well. So we've got an individual starting next week, and that program kicks off, where hopefully we'll be able to align all of these dates and get something more tangible out, Donna.
So for us at the moment, in terms of tracking, then it's RCR data that we need to be looking at, really, in terms of, you know, are we getting better, are we getting worse, are we standing still, or whatever. And then eventually, I mean, you can talk to us about costs at each meeting, but eventually that will be the targets that we'll use for benchmarking our performance.
Yeah, absolutely, and what you'll hopefully see from this is the whole of Wales are in the same position. It's not Velindre as a standout. We're all in that same position, trying to change the system. What we are finding is some patients who are in the system are being defined in different ways, and therefore the systems need to change to categorise them differently. Doesn't mean the patient's waiting any longer, which is the RCR guideline, which is why we keep it in for now, to keep giving that assurance whilst we sharpen up the cost target attainment, really.
So could I request that this is a public document, if for the future report, Paul, if a line can be inserted which explains what's happening for public reassurance? Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping I'll take another look at it, Donna, because there are some comments now in the new PMF which start to talk about cost and what it is, just to remind ourselves what exactly that is. But I'll take another look just to make sure it's explicit. No, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I'm accepting absolutely what you're saying. I accept the position, and but if a member of the public reading this, I think that the clarification you've just given me would be very helpful in a report like this. Absolutely. I'll make sure that's done, Donna. Thanks. Thanks, Paul. Right, I can't see any hands up, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Donna, I did have my.
Oh, sorry, Steve. I can see it now. Yeah. Sorry, Steve.
Only a quick point, just to add to that debate about the cost targets. Clearly, it's going to be an important feature of our MTP discussions over the winter in settling where we're going to go, and we're going to have some discussions as a board about where we think we can get to a cost over the short to medium term, especially as we're going to be in recovery mode and other things. So we're going to have to find a balance for that over the winter, because it isn't just about money, as we heard from the First Minister this morning. It's not all about the money at the moment, it's about capacity. So we're going to have to work our way through this, which is why the other target is really important. So at least as a board, we got a benchmark for knowing where we are against where we were. Exactly. So a really important conversation ahead of us in terms of where we're going to get to over the short and medium term. And as Paul said, it's the same challenge that the other centres face as well. And we're not alone in this challenge, but it's an important one, isn't it? Because it's about people waiting less time for their treatment.
But given that we are also in recovery post-COVID, and we're seeing increased volume coming through, we have to judge and assess the performance against the fact that we are also in recovery. And given that context, I think the service is doing remarkably well. Yes. That's not to say we're hitting all the targets, but this is within the context of we're in recovery too.
Yeah. And we are pretty much meeting all the targets, which is
exactly
an important message, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's the point I didn't draw out, but that's the point I'm making. Absolutely. So can I hand over to you now, Alan, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Following on from the report for July, you'll see that collections performance was strong in this period in terms of red cells and platelets, to the extent that we were actually able to support our Scottish colleagues across the border on 3 mutual aid requests. They were experiencing significant strain and surge, and had a compounding factor of a team being off the road and a centre they were trying to get into not being ready for them. So that provided the opportunity of us being able to support them across borders. New bone marrow volunteer headlines. Recruitment still a challenge for this period due to access into schools, universities, etc. Going forward within the report, there is a narrative about us launching a new strategy, introducing buccal swabs. I can say today that has been launched, and that should help recover the numbers of getting the amount of donors onto our registry through a different recruitment method. In terms of stem cell collections, that is encouragingly starting to bounce back, and we've seen that trending through August and September as well. So we're getting back into a pre-COVID situation in terms of numbers there. Quality and safety markers, I'm encouraged that quality incidence has improved and is again above target, which has been a struggle for us to achieve for some time, but I've noticed that we're going forward, we're also in a positive place. Our part bags, failed venipuncture markers are well within tolerance. Donor satisfaction remains excellent, as you can see there. A couple of areas of strain for us, our serology, reference serology area. We're getting particular high volumes of referrals into this service. It's a small team. They are appropriate referrals. We have been able to make sure that we get in the urgent ones and turn those around in good time. But we're going to set up, and we're starting to benchmark across other services about where this work is coming from, and our suspicion is it's part of the COVID wave on late attendances and more complicated cases hitting the health boards, and we're obviously a reference centre for supporting matches of patients. And I think the other one just to mention, because the workforce report is there as well, there is an increase in some sickness absence within our service. And this has, I can report that this has moved into the August period as well. So there's a watching brief in just some of the strain within the service, which is why we haven't hit some of our efficiency markers. So, you know, there are vacancies within the service, coupled with sickness absence does put the strain on the staff. So well-being and just monitoring that quite closely, I think, is really important at the moment, because the majority of that sickness is tripping into long-term sickness for our service as well. I'll probably draw a breath there. Happy to take any question.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Any queries or observations for Alan? I was looking at the failed or the unsuccessful venipuncture. I've no idea, Alan. What would you've got a target there, but you would never expect to have no unsuccessful venipunctures. I would imagine. So although the target is down slightly, although the performance is down slightly from last month, it's still within your target of tolerance.
Yeah.
But I do note that where there is failed, venipuncture, it's in the North Wales site.
Yeah.
So is there a skills training issue or something there, do you think?
Yeah, it's probably representative. I haven't got the detail in front of me, but I suspect the representative of some new starters and people getting up to their competency assessments.
That would be it.
And then it's about local intervention into this space. So it's an important marker for us, just making sure that the training and the venipuncture method is as good as it can be, I suppose. And that is a national benchmark as well. That is something that we benchmark across UK services. So that's within a tolerance of UK.
And it's got nothing to do with North Walians being reluctant to give up their blood.
No.
No, thanks. That's I'm assured by that. Thank you very much. I'm looking across. I can't see any hands up. I'll just make the same comments as was made earlier. These reports are getting easier to understand, and I think that's reflected in the decrease in the amount of challenge that's coming forward, because we understand what's being put in front of us. So to both you, Alan, and Paul, thank you very much for that. And we move on to the Workforce and OD report, which, Sarah, are you going to introduce this?
Yes, absolutely, Donna. Hopefully I won't drop out this time. Apparently there are technical issues with Sky and Zoom today, so hopefully I'll be all right. So what colleagues can see here is obviously the data to July. I've actually got up to date, particularly around sickness absence. So the rolling absence level to the 28th of September is 5.12%. So it is up slightly. So we are obviously keeping a very close eye on that. And Alan has just indicated that we are looking at this on a case-to-case, case-by-case basis. Just to also inform the board that we've currently got 8 staff who are absent on COVID-related absence. And as I said, that is as of the 28th of September. 5 of those in VCC, 1 in WBS and 2 in Trustwide Services. And that's down slightly from last week. I'm using those numbers as an indication really of the sort of levels of absence when we're talking overall absence rates at about 75 bodies absent on that date. So it's that kind of proportion. But very importantly, we are tracking through anybody that is on long-term absence and actually dealing with that, as I said, on an individual basis. So the Workforce and OTD team is working very closely with managers and working through business partners with the divisions to make sure that we're not only supporting absence, but also supporting well-being and not making sure all the interventions necessary to bring people back where we can are in place. So happy to take any other questions, Chair, on the report.
Thank you, Sarah. Any queries for Sarah? Sarah, do you have any idea what the statutory mandatory compliance looks like across the rest of NHS Wales? Because I think these figures, given that we're still in the middle of a pandemic, I think our figures are very good. I think they're excellent and they're better than anything I've seen, but I haven't looked in the last month or so. So how do we compare?
Our comparator data there's quite a lag. That's the only problem with the comparators. But actually, we are tracking above. We're always in the top 1 or 2 organisations in NHS Wales, Donna, whenever we track this in terms of the national dashboards. But our national dashboard also includes our hosted organisations. So that's why we don't tend to report those numbers through board, because they include at the moment now shared services, which obviously, given the number of staff, skews our overall performance. So we are working with national bodies to allow us to have a core trust-wide dashboard we can then use for better comparators.
So for the areas that this is reporting on, I think the performance, it could be better, but I think it's very good. We need to look at ourselves in corporate and up the game a little bit, but across the piece, I think that's a very good performance for statutory and mandatory. And quite often, in difficult circumstances, which is what the pandemic has meant for us, statutory and mandatory is the thing that falls off, and it hasn't fallen off. So I'm very pleased to note that. And I just was wanting to ask a question, because it's something I've tried just very recently, to what extent ESR and its clunkiness and the difficulties with the ESR might be responsible for some of the disappointing figures in PADR compliance. So I've tried twice recently to put something in that I'm responsible for and failed.
We are as you've just indicated, Donna, we are constantly having to support colleagues really to get that data in. And we do manual data collection exercises as a result of that as well. And we are currently in the early days of looking at ESR2 or a replacement, which may well be a different system. So we can then build on any feedback that we get, Chair.
So just as I accomplish being able to manage ESR, you'll change it for a different.
But hopefully a slightly more user-friendly system. think you're on mute, Chair.
I don't know how I must have pressed the mute button. So I can't see anyone else with their hands up. So we've been asked to discuss, review, and then receive these performance reports. So thank you very much to the three sections of the Trust: Workforce, Cancer Centre, and Welsh Blood Service. And so now we come to 7.6 on the agenda, which is Matthew's debut. I'm going to hand over to you, Matthew, no pressure at all, to take us through the finance report for the period concerned.
Thanks, Chair. So as you can see, this report outlines the financial position and performance to the end of July, which is month 4, but I just want to flag to the board members that there's no material change to the month 5 August position. Unfortunately, there was a timing issue in terms of submission for this board. So in terms of the key performance indicators for finance, you can see that the revenue position, so remaining costs remaining within our income. You can see year to date we're on track, and also forecast year end on track. Also in terms of capital remaining within our capital expenditure limit, you can see we're on track year to date and forecast. And in terms of public sector payment performance, you can see that the forecast is on track and slightly under year to date in terms of performance. And just to flag, these figures are for the trust core only. So when we look at the total trust, we are achieving the target year to date. But there is an issue, a short-term issue that we're working with shared services on in terms of the actual backlog of invoices that we have that are causing an issue, meeting that target to date. So we anticipate the target to be met by the end of the year. So we move to COVID.
Matthew, can I just check? We'll still be above 95% by year end for invoices, will we?
Yeah, that's the what the forecast is saying, and actually we're already meeting it year to date as a trust. It's just the core position. There's a few issues with backlog invoices because of a shortage of staff in shared services, which they're actively working with us to recruit to and fill. So that's the anticipation.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of COVID expenditure and income, you can see the table in section 2.4. You'll be familiar with the costs that we've submitted to Welsh Government, the income that we've received to date, and just to flag the balance of funding that we're still anticipating receiving around £2 million worth of further income. I can confirm that 700,000 of that income has been received, which relates to the underlying deficit bit, so the sentence below the table. So we've had a funding letter confirming that. I can also confirm that in a meeting on Wednesday morning of the Directors of Finance, Steve Elliott, who's the Acting Director of Finance for NHS Wales, indicated that the letters were due out this week in terms of confirming the balance of funding to health boards and trusts. So we're waiting for that letter to arrive, and hopefully, based on what he's told us, we anticipate to receive our COVID funding. In terms of, so that was one of our major financial risks, which based on what I heard today, as I said this week, sorry, I anticipate that funding to come. In terms of the reserves, you will be aware we hold a small emergency reserve for any financial risks, so that's being maintained, and any issues that arise during the remainder of the year, we can play that funding into. There's also a small element of unallocated recurring funding, which would feature in our 5-year financial plan that's been developed amongst the executive team, and that's an ongoing process. So I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions, queries, observations for Matthew? It seems not, Matthew. So so we note the contents of your report. Thank you for it. Don't expect us to always be this Martin's discovered that he's got a credit.
Apologies, Chair. I had a note in the paper, but the paper's so long I couldn't find my note. But on page 3 of the report proper, there's a section which is coyly labelled performance against planned savings target, and there are a row of nils in there. I wonder if you can just give us a quick update, Matt, on where we are in terms of the agreement with the Welsh Government around efficiency savings, and if they have been re-implemented, is that the word, for this year or next year?
Yeah, at the moment, in terms of our savings target, we're on track to deliver. There are a few that we've originally identified at the beginning of the year that we've slipped on, which are to do with the, I suppose, post-COVID anticipated savings around printing, stationery, and travelling expenses, where clearly we've been making savings on a non-recurrent basis. But there's an element of that we're making assumptions on that will continue in terms of new ways of working. So where that slippage has occurred, we've got other non-recurrent schemes for this year offsetting. So at this point, we are anticipating to deliver those targets as part of our overall financial position for this year.
Because if I'm right in thinking last year, they were effectively suspended with the target.
The targets were there and the savings schemes identified, but where organisations identified that they were slipping on delivering, because a lot of them were fairly fundamental, certainly for Velindre and also for health boards, fundamental sorts of service changes where you were looking to make workforce changes, which are not things that were obviously possible to do clearly during COVID. So they were, when you mean suspended, they were actually covered with Welsh Government funding and income.
Yeah.
So the schemes were there. But,
okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Stephen?
I also have the same issue of scrolling down to find my question. My questions are actually about inflation assumptions, Matthew. And clearly there are assumptions built in your financial projections and funding is based on that. But we're reading in the press, of course, daily about significant price increases in fuel and energy. And there are indications that inflation generally within the economy is increasing. The economists tell us that is only going to be temporary. Perhaps it is, but we'll have to see. I'm just wondering how confident you and perhaps fellow directors of finance are feeling about the potential impact of inflation on our finances, given that we're still only halfway through the year. There's a long way to go where inflation could possibly affect us.
I think in terms of this financial year, I'm confident that we can cover any of those issues. I suppose my concern is in terms of the IMTP process and the financial planning for next year and going forward. That's where I've got more concern. So in terms of prices, in terms of pay inflation, and clearly that's set by Welsh Government, and we've had our funding set for this year, and now so we have had a funding letter for that. I'm more concerned in terms of the only discretionary funding will probably be at the 1% that we normally get. And a lot of that could well be eaten up in terms of, as you say, price inflation. So there needs to be a conversation, I think, with Welsh Government collectively as directors of finance around how much of that discretionary compared to previous years is going to be absorbed by the issues of COVID and certainly Brexit as well for us in terms of that inflationary factor. And I'm sure that will be something that in the next DOFS meeting, I know we've got a discussion around the IMTP, so it'd be one, if no one else does, I'll be flagging and how we're going to take that to Welsh Government and represent, I suppose, that position. Because of course we use that 1% funding often to support any new investment proposals that we have. It's a small pot, but it helps to obviously take forward some of the service issues we want to progress, and clearly that's going to be eaten into by inflationary problems, and that's not great for the trust in terms of taking forward its ambitions in terms of those investments. So it's something I will raise through DOFS.
I think it'd be helpful, Matt, if you could update us on that now as we go forward. As I understand it, you know, with lorry drivers and so on and so forth, things are going, as Stephen has set out, things are increasing in price. So, you know, the actual price and the inflationary rate, they don't always happen at identical times, don't they? So it would be helpful, I think, to give us assurance if you would keep us abreast of those developments as they occur.
Yeah, I'll do that, Chair.
Thank you.
Stephen has his hand up.
Which Stephen?
Harry's. I'm blaming Steve Ham for starting the use of the electronic hand, which is not allowed on Zoom.
I've lowered my hand again. Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand in the excitement.
Okay.
Oh, right. So I didn't miss you. Right. Okay. Anybody else? Right. Okay. So thank you for your report, Matt, which we note and we receive. And we now come to a very important section of our agenda. We've been waiting for this for some time, which is things to do with the risk register, matters to do with the risk register and the trust assurance framework. So the first one is item 7.7. We find it on my papers, the risk register, which Lauren, you're going to introduce us.
Yeah, so the paper that we have and the appendix of the, well, 2 appendices of the risk register themselves are the result of implementing the framework that we have previously approved at board, which is that we will report based on the risk category of particular risks and that link to the appetite that we've set as a board. So we determine different risk scores for different types of risks that we wanted to have visibility of here. And before we sort of look at the report itself, I just wanted to highlight section 2.21 in the cover report. And we talked this through at Quality, Safety and Performance as well in terms of our journey in risk reporting. So just to remind ourselves, word framework and sort of references like that can feel very very high level, but just to remind ourselves as to what we're actually aiming for in real terms. So we want all staff to have access to be able to input risk, that we continue to focus on the practical management at risk at all levels of the organisation, and that we have reporting directly from the core systems, as we've spoken about before. That's where the continued development of the quality of data and transparency that comes from. So we always knew that when we started doing that, it was potentially going to be give a slightly different result than maybe when we expected and be slightly clunky to start with, but we're on the journey as we're kind of in the place we expected to be. And we also knew that the way in which we'd set the appetite as a board linked to it, we weren't reviewing the risk register at that time. And what we currently have is 111 risks that are now in reaching the appetite that we'd set. So I don't think anyone around this table would think that that is the right level of risks that as a board is appropriate for us to be scrutinising, but we wanted to start there. That's where we said we'd start, and then review 2 things. So the actual risks themselves are going through a huge amount of quality review and assessment of scores, and also look at the risk appetite levels over the next couple of months. So the risk, as I said, the appendices contain everything meeting appetite, and the cover paper particularly highlights the risks with a residual, so post-control score of 20 and 16.
Lauren, I can't hear you.
Oh.
That's better.
Happy to take any questions on the approach. We can pick up on the individual risks with the owners.
So this is on, I've suddenly, my IT system is, I'm not able to open the documents concerned. So I'm going to need some help, Lauren, here. So the report that you've just given us is in relation to 7.7b.
No, sorry, all of 7.7.
All of 7.7.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't open 7.7b and 7.7c at the moment, but I can open 7.7c. Are there any comments for Lauren? So this is there's a lot of work. We've been waiting for this for some time. I don't say that in any way to be critical. It's been a significant piece of work. So I'm really pleased to see it now coming to us in this not quite mature form, but we really are getting there, as you're saying, with the 111 risks. But we're going to, you know, you clear that and wash that up as we go forward, Lauren. Martin, I think I saw your hand first, and then Hilary has a hand up. So Martin, you first.
Hilary's electronic hand was up well before me.
Okay, sorry, Hilary. I was panicking over my IT issue, so I didn't spot that. So apologies.
No worries, no problem. No, thanks, Lauren. This is, you know, this piece of work is really coming together now. It's good to see. Just a general comment, maybe on the risk around the Welsh language. So it's corporate risk 2398. I think you could add in there that we do translate public documents and so on to show that we are actually trying to achieve the standards in part anyway. I think we need to, you know, demonstrate that we are doing some good things. And then just as a general comment, if anything is to be confirmed or target to be not quite yet there in the control measures, it would be good to have a target date. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hilary. Lauren, do you want to respond to that?
Sarah, did you want to come in on the Welsh?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. No, absolutely, Hilary. We're doing huge amounts of work actually in terms of the standards. So the risk and the update doesn't in any way reflect the volume of activity and progress we have made. So we'll make sure that we can attempt to illustrate that in a few words, but that gives you a good indication of our progress.
Thank you, Sarah. Hilary, are you content? Yeah, okay. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Lauren, thanks for this. This has been quite a while in its formation, but it is the correct and proper way to have this bottom-up approach to our risks. So looking at all of these risks in the round, yeah, you should be quite happy you can't open 7.7b, Donna, because it's a mile long, a very small type as well. So don't be overly worried about that, I don't think. The process, Lauren, as I understand it, is continue to refine, continue to sort of review those and see if that's the appropriate level. And I guess the acid test for me was whether the risks that are identified as being the risks rated as 2016 that are listed in the front paper, the A document, actually represent the organisation, and if they are, the things that we as a board are worried about today, right now. And I think the answer is some of them, but perhaps not all of them are on here. So there's that kind of iterative process of reviewing and sort of looking at to see if that is indeed what we think the high-level risk register should be, the things we should be worrying about. But it's an excellent piece of work as it stands, and it's a very comprehensive job. So thank you.
There's that slogan that I used to see, which is the impossible we do at once, miracles take a little longer. And I think the huge amount of work that has gone into bringing us this far and getting us to this level of maturity, which is going to develop. I'm very pleased to note it. I was very pleased for the forwards at the beginning of each paper, because I couldn't hold in my mind all the, you know, the various risk descriptions and the weightings and so on. So to have all that there to refer to was very helpful. I will try and remember it, Lauren, but I'm just thinking in future, for future papers, it would be just helpful to have that there as something to refer back to, so that we understand what we're looking at. That's just a personal request from me. And Martin, I just wanted to say, I know that you've been involved in this work as well, giving us the benefit of your wisdom and experience, and put on record thanks to Martin, and Lauren, to you and your team. I really get a sense now that we're moving forward with this.
Yeah, thank you to Martin as well. Thank you, Chair.
So if there aren't any other questions. So do you know when you're chair of a meeting and the IT starts to fall apart, you can't, if you're the chair and introducing things, you can't stop talking. So I hope that was probably quite evident then when I lost the whole of section 7 from my papers. They're back now because Emma came in and helped me out. Okay, so we're noting the progress and we're noting the next steps in the development pathway to support full operationalisation of the trust assurance framework. So now we come to section 8 on the agenda, which is the Strategic Development Committee highlight report.
Oh, apologies, Chair. That was 7.7, and we were just going to come on to 7.8, which was the trust assurance framework. If that's okay.
Was 7.7, 7.8, yeah. All right, that's what that. Okay, I thought that you'd said it was all of section 7 you were dealing with. Okay, fine.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. It was all of 7.7. 7.8 is the trust assurance framework. And again, just to remind ourselves what this is, it's the articulation of our strategic risks in terms of meeting our long-term objectives for the organisation. And the way in which we're describing our strategic risks has been developed over a number of months in input from the Development Committee, Audit Committee, and previous approval at Trust Board. So what this document now does is to bring together the filled out version of the templates for each of those strategic risks. And as the cover paper explains, the value in a BAF or a trust assurance framework as we have are to set out the key controls and identify any gaps in the control framework, and then set the sources of assurance against those strategic risks so that we can track how those sources of assurance are providing insight, and then whether there are any gaps and how we're filling those gaps. So again, it's something that's been developed from all members of the exec team in terms of the various alignment to strategic risks, and will continue to be developed in terms of the templates here and how we approach the value of the whole exercise. And sorry, Donna, if it confused the agenda a bit, but so that's 7.8.
So that was 7.8. I thought when you said no, it's the whole of section 7, I did think, you know, we'd want to comment on the fact that we now have a populated trust assurance framework. So my concluding remarks refer in particular to this paper, actually. Anyway, any comments or observations for Lauren on 7.8? Noting that this is the first iteration of the populated trust assurance framework. It sets out the development pathway to date, our next steps and our plans for further development and for how that's going to be implemented across the trust. So that's very reassuring to have that journey set out for us so we know what to expect coming forward. Hilary.
Yeah, just a quick word, Chair, just to say thank you. You know, this is really good piece of work. I know that you've been working really hard on this, Lauren, and your team, and it's really good to see, and it'll be a great and really useful tool when it's all up and running fully.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So again, I'll say it again. So we're noting that progress and that this is the first iteration of the trust assurance framework, and we've heard and can see that the next steps are set out in the paper and as articulated to us by Lauren. Can't see any other hands up, so I'll move us to 8.1, strategic development. And this is the Strategic Development Committee highlight report from the, so I'll hand over to you, Stephen, to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chair. So again, I'll presume everybody's read the paper. I'll just pick a few highlights out of the highlights. So in the advice section, just to advise the board, we did receive an update on the Trust's approach to the prioritisation of capital investment. And the executive approval of the discretionary capital programme for the financial year that we're in, and obviously the spend against that and progress against that is routinely and regularly reported in the finance report, as we heard earlier from Martin. The other one I'll just pick out of, or the other two I'll pick out of the advice section is that we received a presentation on an overview of progress against the key components of the Well-being and the Future Generation Act and how we're achieving the goals and objectives of that. And we also received a progress report against the Nuffield recommendations, and something that Steve touched on earlier in his Chief Exec's report. Then under Ashore, fitting in neatly with the earlier presentation we received earlier in the board, the Strategy Committee received a presentation on the business case for the Acute Oncology Service. So that went through that Strategy Committee and was endorsed by that committee before coming up to the board earlier today. So that's all I wanted to pick out of the highlight report, Chair, and I'm very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any comments for Stephen? This is becoming a busier committee now than it was a bit of a slow start, Stephen, but it's now becoming a committee with a full agenda.
Yeah, indeed. And I say not that I seek to have lots on the agenda, because having a few large strategic things to discuss in some detail is I think one of the attractions of this particular committee. Yeah. So things are gradually being added to it, but we're still finding the time we need to go through the matters in quite a bit more detail than we'd be able to do here at the board. So I think it is working very well as a committee.
Thank you, Stephen. Can't see any hands up, so we note the contents of the report and the actions being taken. We are scheduled now to have a break, but we are a bit ahead of ourselves in terms of time. So I'm going to suggest, as the next item is also introduced by Stephen, that we take 8.3 at this point, which is the Transforming Cancer Services report. Oh, I've got problems again. I can't open these documents either. I'll have to rely on memory.
No, I don't think there's a particular document with this, so I think it's an oral update. We're not presenting a document because the most recent meeting of the subcommittee was only on the 21st of September. So the highlight report wasn't ready in time for the board. But just to give you an oral update in terms of what was discussed at the subcommittee, the scrutiny subcommittee, it was exclusively standing items of business. So we received standing items in terms of an update on the finance report, the risk register, programme delivery, project delivery, integrated assurance and approvals plan, engagement and collaboration, and again, a progress report in terms of implementation of the Nuffield Trust recommendations. So they were all there for assurance and for noting there were no items for approval or endorsement other than, of course, the minutes of the previous meeting, the 21st of July. So that's just a quick oral update, and I say the highlight report will come to the board in due course.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the
I think you've muted yourself, Donna.
If we can also take 8.4, I think, before we have a break, because it is also part of Transforming Cancer Services. And I understand, Lauren, you're introducing this item as Non isn't able to be with us today.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it's the usual update from a comms engagement perspective on the previous period and what's coming up. So in the previous period, a couple of things just to draw out are the engagement and communication we did around the start of competitive dialogue for the new Velindre Cancer Centre, which was a great milestone to be able to talk to people about. And then also the Velindre Matters latest newsletter. We had a printed newsletter for the first time, which went out to all the residents of our surrounding communities. Coming up we are preparing for when we do start work on site, how we communicate and engage with our community staff and patients around that activity. We are preparing for another round of meetings with various of the groups of local residents. And in terms of the competitive dialogue, as that continues to progress through, as Steve referred to in the CEO report, it's the way in which our clinicians and staff across the Cancer Centre and our regional partners are engaged in that work is something that we're focusing on for the next period. And as we've talked about over the last couple of reports, we are continuing to really strive to get the balance right between communication and engagement, and how we continue to improve in that respect will be well informed by the down to earth work. So the digital conversation that they've been helping to facilitate for us is now reporting back, and so we'll be able to share that more formally in the next meeting, and how we can use that feedback again from staff and the community about how we progress going forwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. It's quite a short report, and what is hidden in there is a huge amount of work for a small team. So I just want to acknowledge that in this meeting, and ask if there are any observations or queries that anybody wants to put to Lauren, or to Steve, or to Stephen Harris, or myself. It's fair to say there's been an intense period of work for us. There's absolutely so much that's been going on. A lot of balls to keep in the air, and with a small team that have kept those balls in the air for us. So if there aren't any queries, then we note that report. And at that point, it's just coming up to 2 o'clock. It's a bit earlier than I thought, but would people welcome a 10-minute comfort break? I got some nods, so therefore we'll come back at 2:10. You don't have to leave this time, but I would advise you to take off your video and nôl unwaith eto. Okay. Croeso nôl pawb unwaith eto. I'm now recovered from the drama of losing papers while I was in the middle of talking with you. And we now come to item 8.5 on the agenda, which is the progress report on Q1 delivery plan, which Carl, I think you're going to lead on this paper.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I won't say too much. The paper speaks for itself. I think it's fair to say that given the challenges presented at the start of the year, our progress in this sort of one-year plan, if you recall, government asked for a one-year plan to take us through to the end of this financial year and then back to a three-year cycle. I think is described as steady and really positive. If I draw your attention just to the important part, which is on page 3. So as you're well aware, behind this, it's a progress tracker. We track the actions across each of the quarters, and that table at the top there basically explains that we're in good shape. And then just for the ones which are in red, draw your attention on B17 and also the 2 in amber, VO5 and VO8. They set out what they are in para 2.3 and para 2.4. So I'll just leave it there, Chair, if you're happy, and I'll just take questions with colleagues who've got responsibility for some of these actions as well. So,
gosh, thank you, Carl. That was reasonably quick. I've got 1 or 2 questions, but prior to that, I'm just going to open it up if anybody's got any queries for Carl. We go back to a 3-year plan for the next one, don't we? Which we set out in the paper, which has been consent. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah, 2022 onwards.
Carl, I was particularly pleased to see the little bit, but it was only a snippet of an update on progress in Park Road, and I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit about exactly how far we've come with that.
Yeah, I can do. Perhaps myself and Paul maybe. Obviously, the staff well-being is critical. So you recall we took over the lease for Park Road, which is a really handy building because it's literally in the corner there, which is quite an ideal place. Kitted out with digital first of all. We did have a bit of an untoward incident there, if you recall as well, in terms of the theft. But I think that's progressing. There's about £120,000 worth of capital left to just get that as required. And I'd probably just bring Paul in there just to make sure that colleagues get the sense that we're making sure that staff are well catered for, having the chance to step away from what is clearly quite a challenging work environment and take a bit of time out just to have 10 minutes to themselves. Paul, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, the simplest as you call it, the SLT has agreed part of the discretionary capital to support the other capital requirements to carry on with the work in there. Early doors, we had started to put some stuff in and outside, actually not great in this weather, but starting to get people to utilise those areas. The next part really is the state's carrying on that work now. The money's been agreed, really.
And when do you think it would be available for staff to start using it? Got any idea of a time frame?
I don't have that to my fingertips here, but what I can do for the board's happy, I can circulate an email after the board just to give you timelines, if that would be okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming into winter and so on. I think it would be helpful for us to know. Thank you. I noticed, Matthew, you've got your hand up.
So it's not just not a question, it's just looking on the statement at the bottom of page 3 around the COVID outstanding from the 2 million, just like previous report, just to say, as I said then, there's 700 days of that 2 million we have received, as we anticipate eventually with this week to early next week for the balance from this based on what's discussed last week.
I didn't hear a word of that. Am I the only one?
Something's happened to you, Sam and Matt. I'm not sure what. You're in the office, so something on the network, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess.
So it was in relation.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
I can probably pick up what Matt was saying there, Chair. And I think first of all, we spend some more money on digital infrastructure. That's quite clear, isn't it? And the second bit, I think what Matt was commenting on really is obviously we had about 7 schemes, he's back now, 7 schemes we put in at very short notice when government asked us if we had any sort of capital schemes in this year, which were COVID related. So as board will be aware, we put in for 7 schemes and they were all approved, which is really great news. I was with Jason Hoskins yesterday, so the good news turns into work for somebody, doesn't it? So we are actively now trying to put arrangements in place to ensure those capital schemes are delivered in this year, and clearly, importantly, get benefits to patients, donors and staff as soon as possible. Matt, I think that's what you were commenting on. I just check.
Don't hear me, so can you hear me now? No.
No. You're loud, but we can't hear you.
If someone can help Matt. Thanks.
Can't hear Lauren very well either. And the other question I was going to ask is refers to 2.4, the discussion on plasma-derived medicine fractionation project. You're awaiting guidance from Welsh Government on moving forward formally with a programme of work. And I'm just wondering, have we got set objectives for that in this year's IMTP? Can you remind me, Carl?
Not as yet, but I guess Steve and Alan might want to come in first to just set the context. We're waiting on some government policy advice, and then we can fall off there. I don't know if Steve or Alan wanted to comment. Probably
just say, Alan and I both received a copy of a letter today confirming that we can move forward in setting up project arrangements on that, and we had a conversation with Andrew Evans, Chief Pharmacist down in Government, and Kath Cody, official, to take that forward.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Well, that's a very positive development, which is going to create a huge amount of work. So we have to factor that into our plans and the work that's involved. I can't see any. Oh, Alan Prosser.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just to add as well that we are signed up, the Minister has signed up to the UK Memorandum of Understanding for Bloods for Medicine as well. So that means we are at the table for UK-wide discussions in terms of provision and finding a fractionator. So again, very encouraging. So I'm sure that is going to get some traction over the coming weeks and months.
So a couple of things coming together there. So thank you for that, Carl, and we note and we're pleased to note the progress. As you said at the beginning, you know, we're in good shape according to the number of actions, and those which are red and amber, we're in good shape. 8.6 is the disability equality presentation. Again, this is led by yourself, Carl, and you're going to explain about equality ambassadors. Yeah, it's just popped up. Over to you, Carl.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And I think Kyle is somewhere driving the PowerPoint. If I just ask, is that okay, Kyle? Are you there? Yeah,
I am here. It's actually Carol who's driving your presentation.
Okay, thanks. Just get ourselves organised then. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I guess just a bit of context, really. I guess the ambassadors' roles are new in the organisation, as colleagues are aware, and I think it's really exciting opportunity for us to just, I guess, walk in somebody else's shoes for a little while and just to empathise and understand a bit more than perhaps we do and should in busy days and busy lives. And I don't just mean for Velindre NHS Trust, but actually for broader public services in life. So if we just move on one, Kyle, if we can. I mean, the front side there says, I'm fortunate enough to be the ambassador for the disability agenda. What I was hoping to do there, the story, just talk a little bit about some of the key issues and drivers, which you'll probably be familiar with. Just a little bit about me then, actually, and what about me and my experience, and then perhaps get on to what we're doing well, and more importantly, what we can do more of toward the end. So it's just, I think, really a personal reflection in my sort of first 2 or 3 months in this role. Thanks, Kyle. So just the one thing I've omitted, which is I guess, an odd one really, but just a definition of disability under the Equality 2010 Act. So essentially, if you have a physical or mental impairment that has substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. So that really defines, under the Equality Act 2010, what we mean by disability. And I guess for me, the two things which struck me were, so what does that mean? And as it says there, it directly affects and impacts people who use our services. And I apply this lens to public services PLC, not just Velindre, but also people who wish to work for people who deliver those services and currently people who work within those services. So my point really, it affects everybody in some way, shape or form. And I guess the other thing we're well familiar with are some of the key laws and drivers and policies. So Disability Discrimination Act, Equality Diversity legislation, our own equality objectives and the action plan for the next 4 years, and the way in which we monitor. If we just move on, another one, please, Carl. Another two actually. So a bit about me. Just take one more, Carl. Thanks. So I guess you would never believe it. I don't look old enough, but I have had 25 years public service. And I guess I've been responsible in my career for a whole host of things, from, as it says there, strategy, planning, estates, digital. And I've worked across most of the government and public sector departments. So I've worked in local authority. I've worked in the NHS for the last 4 to 6 or 7 years. I've worked in Welsh Government for 5 or 6 years. I've worked in the fire service and the ambulance service. So I feel I've got a broadish nature and knowledge of all of those sectors. And I also feel that the work that I've been involved in, from setting policy, planning, integration, right the way through to undertaking DDA audits and actually delivering capital schemes, gives me a real good sense of knowledge. As it says there, that some of the things I've been doing are really around the principle of equity, diversity, and making sure everybody gets what they need from public service. I guess the other bit for me then was around the various organisations I've just touched on. I've actually done quite a lot of work. And I track back right the way through the fire service in a really old building in Lanley Hall, through to government. So I've had a really, really good grounding in these sorts of areas. But interestingly, I then started to think about, well, why did I put myself forward for this role? And we were offered a sort of first and second choice. And then it became more sort of personal, really. And there's sort of 3 primary reasons why I sort of put my hat in the ring for this. The first really was the one I just sort of touched on earlier. The way in which disability is defined and happens, I think it's likely to affect everybody in the whole of Wales and the wider UK, directly or indirectly at some point during their lives. And that's really quite powerful. And the second thing then for me was real first-hand experience. So everybody aware, from the last 5 or 6 years, my mum, my poor old mum, I use her for everything I test really, because she's 72. She's lovely. I think she's the best thing since sliced bread. But more importantly, she's average Joe. She's got comorbidity. She's got COPD. She's got mobility issues, so on and so forth. So I think she's probably quite a good test of how people are getting on, and do we make some things simpler for people, more personal or harder. And I guess the last bit for me then was a personal experience. And then going back to the definition of disability, again, colleagues around the table, some may not know. Of course, in 2017-18, I went through a real tough period where I had a real mental health problem, and essentially it culminated in almost suicidal thoughts. So, I've had a real first-hand personal experience of what it feels like to be in a tough spot, and really start to think about how do services respond to people who need them at the time they need them. So those are the sort of 3 lenses I started to look at the opportunity which was presented to me through the exec team, and start to think, well, actually, what does that mean for me? But more importantly, what does that mean for me as a provider of services to a wide range of people across South East Wales and Wales? And that drops me into then, what did I know and what did I do? So as I said earlier, I thought I knew my job well. I thought I knew the law well, and I thought I understood things far better than I did. So we just move on one further slide, please, Clive. And I also thought that the Trust was doing a whole host of good. And I can just confirm to the board, we are. The Trust takes disability extremely seriously. And I was really proud when I started walking around the organisation and asking patients, donors, staff, how we're getting on. And I was really pleased and proud to hear that we are designing services around need. We are implementing the various legislative requirements, but not just at a process level, actually going the extra mile and trying to live the spirit and the intent of the law and actually really understand what people need from the service, how we best provide that. And also we're doing a whole host of great things in terms of education, learning, providing people the opportunity to step into somebody else's shoes for an hour, for a day, just to understand how it feels for them and how the things that we do either make it feel better or a whole lot worse. And then from my sort of perspective in terms of systems processes, we are really starting to hardwire in things so the unconscious becomes conscious. So making sure we do EQIAs, making sure we do talk about discrimination in the decisions we make, and then measuring the progress. So that was the good. If you just move on a touch more, please, Kyle. I also found out there's things I didn't know. There's so many great things going on in our organisation across NHS Wales. I was dumbfounded. These were the things. I get across I touch a lot of things, a lot of services in the organisation, and this was going on without me really being cited on it. And since I found out about those things, I've also had a chance, for example, to spend time. I've been to the Disability Network. I met 20 people there who've got very different experiences. I've learned about autism. I've started to learn more about dementia. But what struck me really was, if I don't know that, how many other people don't know that all this great work's going on, and then what difference can it make? Next slide, please, Kyle. Staff network touched on, so next slide. And then I sort of stumble across, starting to think about, well, what does all that mean? And this, this really struck a chord with me, because we're all, really busy, really take our roles seriously, really want the best for people we serve. But sometimes you just don't know what's out there. And the thing that struck me in terms of the disability environment is so vast and complex. Thankfully, it's so dynamic and fast moving as we start to identify the things we need to do better. And interestingly, and I was listening obviously to the Minister and the First Minister this morning talking about health. And I guess for me, what struck me listening to that, we're really talking about the future of health and about personalised medicine and immunotherapy and genetic sequencing. And for me, the thing which really struck me is the simple things. Get the simple things right. And I'm really conscious that we might run off doing the really, really high cutting edge scientific things, but the simple things like asking, what do you need from us and how can we make it better? I'm just conscious that public service might lose that occasionally because we think we know far too much, but actually we know far too little. Thanks, Kyle. So I just started to do a bit more reading then. And then what really struck me, I picked up this document, read it one night, and I was both uplifted and saddened, because what it showed me was that UK and Wales and NHS has come an awful long way, but pretty much people with a disability generally get a poor quality service, poorer experience and worse outcomes. And I thought, well, how can that be? For all the money in 2021, all the effort, how have we got to that place where, despite everybody's best efforts and real commitment, in this organisation particularly, we still haven't quite got it right and we're not doing quite enough? Thanks, Kyle. And then I stumbled across, like everybody else, the pandemic. And I think this really is, again, it was just quite useful timing, actually, when we start to talk about, I guess, systemic failings in culture, don't we, in terms of the UK and, inequity. I just picked up this headline from a recent BBC article there, 12th of June, 2021. And it really struck a chord with me. And just read the headlines there. People with learning disabilities dying 25 years younger than the rest of the population. Just almost stop and just think about that. A quarter of a century younger if you've got you have left life expectancy just because you have some form of disability. And then COVID just worsened that, made it far more acute. And as it says there, 13% deaths through COVID, doubled if you had some form of learning disability. And we work in healthcare, so that really did make me stop and think. Thanks, Carl. Next slide. So then, I don't know if you've read this book, but it just really struck a chord with me there, Rob Graff. Ignorance. I think, Public Service Wales, Velindre, we are doing a really good job of doing loads of great things. But I don't know if we're doing enough, and I don't know if we know enough. And I think that's the challenge for everybody. I thought I knew an awful lot, but then I really scratched the surface, and I know a lot, but not enough. And I just think it's almost an ignorance, not by design, but just because we need to do more. Next slide, please, Kyle. So some reflections from me then as the ambassador. Personally, there's a huge message for me about knowledge. You can never have enough knowledge, and keep learning. I think that really strikes a chord with me when I've spoken to people who've got a disability. Getting it right is easier than getting it wrong in the long term. We always find reasons why it's all too difficult. It's not practicable. And the DDA talks about that, doesn't it? I remember my time in the fire service where we had a 60-year-old building, no lifts, and actually making practicable adjustments. Well, that's no good if I need something more. And clearly embedding this into our DNA, what we do when people aren't looking, how do we do things around here? And particularly having more conversations, and not just for the conversation's sake, make them meaningful, listen, learn, and then let's act. For the trust, I think for me particularly, and I will say this, the trust does an awful lot, and I was quite proud of the things I saw and I've spoken to in my 2 months so far. But I guess the message I took away from having those conversations, only small ones at this point, just walk in somebody else's shoes once in a while because you learn an awful lot. And for me particularly, the little things matter a million, and it's the smaller things matter the most. And we can talk about gene sequencing and everything else, but actually just the things like a simple curb ramp, and those are the things I stumbled across where you could easily fix them. Thanks, Kyle. Next slide. So we then discussed this. I give this presentation or a similar one to Exec Management Board a couple of weeks ago, and we spent a good sort of 45 minutes going around this, just reflecting on what we're doing well, but actually what more can we do? And these were some of the reflections from colleagues in the exec team. How do we get assurance that actually we are giving equitable care which meets need, rather than just discharging our duty under the law? I think there's a very big difference. What does good look? You know what I always say, what does good look like? But where is best practice? How can we share? And again, holding the mirror up. I mean, we do great things, but I suspect if we asked a number of people, they would identify a number of things we could do far better, far quicker. And then broadly, how can I then use this role? I can't solve everything. That's not the intent for this role. But I guess together we can go a whole load further and make things better, far quicker. So next slide. So for me, this role, I hope I've got the gist of this role. I think I have. It's just getting out and talking to people and actually trying to free things up and actually getting some voices heard, which currently may not be as vocal or as visible as might be. Leadership and accountability, we're the board, so we need to be accountable for things. And as it says, there's zero tolerance. Data, we talk about data and insight-led organizations. We often go with gut. Gut is often always right, but you can't ever get away from hard data to support that. I think sometimes we're too intuitive-led rather than insight-driven. And then the final one for me really was around what's just happened for the last 18 months and 24 months. The pandemic, as it says, has really exposed the inequality gap. So how can we as an organization, rise to the challenge, rise further to the challenge, and really set the exemplar? So last slide for me. Again, you'll have seen this, it's an African proverb, but I think it's really quite meaningful. This really is about a fairer, more just and equitable society. And we can only do that if we do it together. So to do that, we need to listen, we need to engage, we need to act, but we just need to spend more time, for me, stepping into other people's shoes for a couple of minutes a day, because that really was quite telling for me. So that's, I think, my first couple of months in this post or role, and happy to just first of all ask, do my reflections echo other colleagues? And then secondly, just a conversation about how we might take some of this forward.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Whenever that happens, it's always very powerful. You share personal experiences. I'm going to open this up for discussion. I can't see any hands up. Oh, Jan.
Thanks, Carl. I thought it was a really brilliant presentation, because when you get these roles of being a champion, it's often hard to actually pin down what you can actually do. But as somebody who's spent my career in safeguarding and writing safeguarding adult reviews, your slides really chimed with me. We can never forget that we have people with learning disabilities dying because of constipation. Nothing else wrong with them but constipation, because nobody felt able to talk to them about doing a poo. And now there are books out there, there's lots written, but those materials, the uptake of those materials is really limited. So it's about, for us, often getting the basics right so that people can access services. But I felt your presentation was really, really heartfelt. And I also would like to thank you for sharing your own personal experience, because until senior leaders talk about their own vulnerabilities and the stresses that people feel within organisations, other people within that organisation will feel they have to keep those things secret. For many years, we've seen mental health problems covered up with back pain on sick notes, haven't we? Because people have been too scared. They felt it would be career damaging for them to disclose the fact that they also, like everybody, suffer with anxiety and depression. And we've all got our demons. So I really welcome you sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Martin.
Yeah, to echo Jan's comments, thank you, Carl. It's really helpful. I think one of the things you haven't mentioned here, but obviously there's a lot of stuff we do, is our support of the transplant games, which was 2-3 years ago back in Newport, back in that old weird world before the pandemic. And that was something we did, which was really important, when transplant is another sort of area of people which we need to look after. We echo now we've just come out of the Paralympics and all the exposure we've had about disabilities and how they were able to be part of society. And I think the Birmingham Commonwealth Games next year will take that forward even further, where the Commonwealth Games will include the Paralympic Games as part of it, rather than be two separate events. They are run by one single organisation, and that again will send some positive messages out into the ether. One thing I just pull us up on in terms of our ambition is on the slide, which you talk about what does it mean for the trust. You said under leadership and accountability, you said zero tolerance of discrimination. Well, we're in a territory here where we're talking about reasonable adaptations. So, for example, we've talked about doing these meetings, and we do these live, and there's a conversation about whether they should be done with Welsh language. We don't go down the route of doing sign language, for example. So there is discrimination everywhere we look. But I think to say zero tolerance is frankly not achievable. We should minimize it and reduce it and eliminate wherever possible. But we don't go that extra mile everywhere because it's simply not possible. So I just think we just to be realistic in our ambition. But I agree entirely with all the sentiments we're talking about here. But let's not set up sort of hostages to fortune here, because clearly we don't do everything we could possibly do in every category.
Yeah, can I just respond? I think it's really helpful point, Martin. And I think there's two things, as you say. Our ambition should be absolutely, up there. I guess then, I guess the bit for me, not directly to your question, Randy, but the thing I've been sort of reflecting on, speaking to colleagues, as I guess for Wales and public services, because that's what I work, and that's why I work in them, because I'm passionate about them. I've chosen to do this for a reason. Is that, we talk an awful lot about the things we should do, equality, diversity, Welsh language, and we talk about embedding and mainstreaming. They still, for me at the minute, feel a bit on the outer edge, trying to fight their way in. But from and I'm not an expert in anything, and certainly not in this area, but from my understanding of things, doing it right first time gives everybody a better experience. And actually, if we just get into the economics of it, costs a lot less over the long term as well. So I think let's see where that takes us. That would be my sort of challenge. But I agree with you. There is not an infinite amount of money, but actually many of the things I've experienced cost nothing. Just cost nothing. It's just about listening, dignity and respect, and understanding and empathy. Those don't cost a penny, do they?
Absolutely.
Oh, I got lots of hands up now, and I wanted to come in at one point. I don't know if I can check the order, because not everybody's used in hand signals. I got Stephen, Steve, Nick and Sarah. Shall I go with you first, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I suppose, firstly, just to repeat without embarrassing Carl, thanks and appreciation for not only an excellent presentation, but also very honest reflections on the experience you've been through yourself and understanding firsthand some aspects of the disability agenda. So thank you for that, Carl. I suppose I just got two almost musings rather than questions, which are going to tie one of them into something on the agenda earlier, which is around our 15-step challenge. And I'm now wondering out loud, because I'm keen to be part of that, whether when we undertake the 15-step challenge, will we end up undertaking it as able people, and will we be cited on I suppose how that might be different for people less able than ourselves, and maybe that's something Nick might want to comment on. But I'm now actually questioning myself, when I do a 15-step challenge, am I doing it from other perspectives other than my own? That was the first one. And the second one, Carl, obviously we're going through a very long and detailed process of designing and building a brand new cancer centre for South East Wales for the next 2 generations, and whether what you've just been through yourself in terms of taking on this role has in any way perhaps changed your view about how we might approach the design of that, and perhaps reflect on different forms of disability we might need to accommodate with those designs. So those are sort of 2 questions come musings out loud.
I'll let Nick pick the first one up, Stephen, obviously. Nick.
Thank you. A really good question, Stephen, and absolutely, because I don't think we can view it from any other perspective than an able-bodied person, if that's what we are. And let's remember, a lot of disabilities are hidden as well. So yes, we do need to do this. I mean, clearly the 15-step challenge process at the moment is very limited, given the volume of people we can have in our clinical areas due to the pandemic. But this is an area that we do need to focus on, because there always has been the plan that we will do this with patients and donors and public. So we won't just go as officers of the organisation, but we'll involve patients and donors in those visits once we're able to do so safely. So we will have to then link in with, on a cycle of business, some third sector organisations and disability groups to really help us and come with us on those, so we can look at it from as many perspectives as we absolutely able to do. So really, really good question.
Yeah, can I just come back to your second question, Stephen, about the design? I think, yeah, clearly we will design in or try as best we can future-proof. I guess the other thing which just struck me as you're asking that really important question was, I guess there's buildings and there's capability, and then there's culture. And I'll give you an example I came across I was just watching a program, I can't remember what it's called, about future technology. And again, it really struck a chord with me, because they're in Japan, is always the case, isn't it, with sort of technology. There was a young boy about 21 who was bedbound. He was, I think he was tetraplegic. So I think from the neck down, just check I've got that correct. Never been outside the house. Quadriplegic, thank you. I do apologise for any offence I've caused there. That's my learning, so I need to learn more. But he'd never left his house. Yet they basically got him a small robot. A small control. They placed a bot in a restaurant in the community, and he was controlling that with his eyes. But he was essentially employed. So he was working in that restaurant, and all of a sudden he was employed. His self-esteem went up. The social value increased. So I guess, how ambitious do we want to be? Because that, for me, it's not watching James Bond, it's happening. So if you think that is happening now, how can we design those sorts of thoughts in as well? Not just to limit it to buildings. And I know that wasn't what you were suggesting, Steve, but I think it's almost like opening up the world, isn't it? How can we? So I think that's the sort of lens I'd like to look at it through.
Thank you, Carl. This is very sort of a worrying, uplifting conversation at the same time. So I'm going to, Nicola, I think you had your own point to raise, and then I'm going to go to Sarah, then I'm going to come in, and then I'm going to let Steve Ham draw it to a bit of a close. Nicola.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say sort of links in with Stephen's questions, and you know, absolutely, when Carl did present this to Executive Management Board, you know, it really did engender quite a lot of discussion, and you know, as a team, you know, there's a lot that we are planning to take forward in relation to this, and for me, it really is, you know, how we co-produce our services, and even services that, you know, may not be going under major transformation like the new hospital, but co-produce it with our patients and donors, but all of them, and not just a small number, and how we actively do that is really, really important. And I know the Welsh Blood Service, for example, is doing just that, you know, looking at patients with learning disabilities, access for hearing impairment. So there is a number of pieces of work that you know, we are doing, and I think as an organisation we need to systematically work through that. But aligned with the previous point, we you know, we really just need to sort of up our games a little bit, all of us. It's something that, you know, is at the heart of what we have done as a trust, and I think over the last 18 months, pandemic has, you know, has taken our minds off this a little bit. So quite a lot of work left to do, but you know, good plans underway.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Carl. It was a really powerful presentation, so that certainly resonated with me. There's a couple of points really from me. One, I think in terms of the zero tolerance, Martin makes a good point in terms of absolute discrimination. I think in my mind it's about active discrimination, so zero tolerance to what we hear, what we see, that is discriminating against anyone really for any reason, and I think that's what I hope we all subscribe to, and certainly do as an organisation in line with our values. So I take Martin's point though, that we can't provide everything to everyone at all times, and we've always got to work on the best balance we can find to that. Just in line really with what the Minister said this morning around the foundational economy, and how do we employ more disabled people, and how are we leveraging our ability to do that. And we're obviously working as an organisation within our Widening Access programme to look at all of those options and possibilities, and that plays completely into this agenda for me. It's a very important component part of what we need to grow and do more of as an organisation. And then last of all, just to update board colleagues, we talked last time when Jazz did her presentation about wanting to do more as a board in terms of looking at the ED&I as a whole. And we are currently developing an ED&I board development programme which will fit into our board briefing sessions for 2022. So we're developing that, co-developing that with a colleague of mine, Jill Evans, OB, who's been a lead in this space for a number of years in NHS Wales, and looking at actively now how do we put the component parts in of that. And I'm meeting with each board colleague to talk about your wants, needs and asks in this area, so that we can make sure we furnish that within that programme. Thank you, Chair.
I'm very pleased to hear that, Sarah, very pleased. I mean, I think I did mention to you about Jill some time ago, and then you said to me she's retired, but obviously she's still keeping busy. So I'm very pleased to hear that, and I look forward to the briefing sessions. And so just before I bring Steve Ham in, one of the things I wanted to say is I think my perception is that there's what I might call inadvertent discrimination which takes place in this organisation. Some of you might know that I've got some severe mobility problems. I was born with congenital dislocated hips and very severe bilateral talipes, which are club feet in ordinary parlance. And the surgery that I was very lucky to have as a young baby and afterwards has stood me in good stead. And I've been a nurse and working on my feet, and it's been brilliant. But as I've got older, that surgery the benefits from that surgery is dissipated. And I now have very severe orthopedic problems where every time I walk upstairs, I've got bone-on-bone impaction between my tib and fib and my ankle bones, which is extremely painful. I can't stand for long periods. I've got very severe mobility problems. And each time I walk into a lift in this organisation, there's a notice which tells me not to be a couch potato and to walk up the stairs, and I feel really stigmatised when I see those notices. So we're trying to attend to one policy, which is about healthy living and so on, and inadvertently it's impacting on me with mine. I feel ashamed that when I go into a lift and I feel as though people are looking at me, because the signs all around are, you should be taking the stairs, you should get off the couch and walk so many kilometres a day and so on. And these notices are ubiquitous across the trust. And no one has set out to offend or upset me at all. I understand that. And this is still one of the happiest places I've ever worked in my life. But I do feel stigmatized when I see those notices, because you might look at me and think that I haven't got mobility problems, but I have. I just thought I would share that. And maybe we can think about it. Steve.
So I was just checking I wasn't on mute before I started talking. I think, thanks Carl, first of all, for the presentation, and we did have a really good conversation with the exec board about it as well. And I think these sessions are starting to really deliver what certainly I think Sarah and I and Kerry at the time had a conversation about delivering, about opening up conversations we haven't had before. I think that's really important for us. And I think going back to some of the comments that Martin and Sarah and Carl have made around actually knowingly make our decisions rather than make decisions in the absence of a discussion in the round. That's what I want to get out of this personally. I think we open ourselves up to a much broader conversation where we understand these aspects better than we previously have. And I think that's the growing that we'll take out of this, and we continue to do this in the sessions we'll have next year as a board. But as you say, Donna, is when you make those decisions in your personal circumstances, knowing that you're doing it in the round, because we get driven by policy, particular policy drivers. So everybody fully understands why those signs are up, but actually if you're in a position you can't conform to those, or actually even you want to, but you can't.
Yeah.
We knowingly communicate that and understand where people are in the round as we make these decisions. And I think that's really important for us as an organisation.
Thank you, Steve. I'm really very pleased to see this programme of work develop, and we began with the first presentation with Jazz and we've now had Carl. I'm really pleased to see this work going forward. Sarah, I'm thanking you for your leadership in this, and I'm looking forward to the board development sessions in which we'll all have a chance to learn and to develop, and then to use our leadership skills to influence the organisation and our colleagues. I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you, Carl, for leading that session, and you'll keep us updated as appropriate at a future board meeting on how this work is taken forward. So we come to 8.7, a very important report for us today, which is the pay gender gap report. This report has to go to Welsh Government, and it includes the public reporting of our findings. It's a requirement that we do that. As we know, due to so much was stalled as a consequence of COVID, we didn't submit such a report last year. So this report, as I understand it, Sarah, is a 2-year, covers a 2-year period. So if I can hand over to you, Sarah, to introduce the report and your findings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So as Donna said, last year the requirement to produce the annual gender pay gap report was stood down, and that has been stood back up this year, and we have by the end of September, that's today, have to submit this to Welsh Government and publish the report. And what we decided to do in the spirit of transparency is actually go back and look at the missing year, as well as the year we're required to report on now, which is the year to the end of March 2020. So you will see there are 2 sets of data within this report flowing through the different sections. I just want to pick up a few key points. There's an awful lot of detail in here, as you'd imagine. It's a very important thing that we lay out in a certain way. First of all, just to be aware that gender pay gap analysis, of course, is very different from issues relating to equal pay, because that deals with pay differences who carry out the same jobs or similar jobs. And we have pay evaluation systems in place in the NHS, which actually ensure that that isn't the case. But what we are looking at here is the mean and median earnings of male and female employees, and a comparison of that as an indication of any underlying issues that may play into our system as a result of gender. And that's really what this is trying to surface and trying to make us aware of. So there's an awful lot of detail, as I said, about the definition of who we consider within this report. And what you can see as well is comparators with different sectors of the economy and different types of employees. Also very importantly, that in terms of what is deemed to be a significant gender pay gap difference, the Equality Act confirms that a percentage pay difference of greater than or equal to 5% should be treated as a significant gap and acted on accordingly. So where a gap of this percentage exists within the trust and or within hosted organisations, we do need to develop action plans to uncover what is underneath that gap, and we need to address it where we can. Also very importantly to point out that this report, by the nature of our requirements, covers the whole trust as a legal organisation, and for the purposes of today, for the 2 years we're reporting on, includes NWIS and includes NWSSP, which, as we know, include a large number of employees over and above those within the core trust services. So these are reported as one within this report. Just moving down now then to page 16, just moving past some of the definitions and details around the numbers of employees. What we can see then when we start to look at the specifics, so there's a lot of very good news in here in terms of where we've been previously and where we are as an organisation in terms of our mean gender pay gap, both for the year end in 2019 and the year end in 2020. What we do see under 9.3 on page 16 is the median hourly pay gender pay gap, and what we can see there is as at March 2020, that we are seeing a percentage point difference of 5.82%, which of course does take us into that significant gap reporting. So that's where for the first time we're seeing that as a trust we need to develop now a broader understanding of what sits underneath that in terms of that median, and also then prepare an action plan. And you can see then later on in the report we have details of action plans. We also then can see that when we look at bonus payments, because that's another area we are required to consider, we as a trust, as core services, don't operate bonus payment schemes, but there is one such scheme in the prescription processing system within NWSSP, which is where we are reporting here in terms of bonus payments. And you can see there again that there is a gender pay gap, which takes us into that significant range of 12.72%. in terms of the mean bonus payment for the year end in March 2020. So again, NWSSP colleagues are looking into that and actually developing actions that help them understand why that is the case and what they can actually do to mitigate that moving forward. What we can then see is that we have then towards the end of the report, as I said, on page 24 and then within Appendix A, action plans which are trust-wide actions, which we're doing to promote gender equality as a whole, but then also more specific actions which get into the specifics of the percentage differences that I just indicated. So on page 24, we do identify actually the Executive Ambassador Programme, that there is now an Executive Ambassador for Gender, that's Kath O'Brien, that we are continuing and will step up our monitoring of job adverts for inclusive language to ensure that we get proportionate numbers of male and female applicants, including part-time workers, which actually does indicate a slight difference within the report. That we are supporting staff during summer and Easter school holidays with childcare subsidy, and that we are looking very closely at our strategic equality plan, where there is an objective around fair pay. So we're working there with partner organisations across public sector on that. We, very importantly, need to also consider how we are promoting and making known to people the ability to look for incremental credit when they join the organisation. We see described in the report a process which people on Agenda for Change pay can use to submit applications for an increase in starting salary if they have got prior experience, which we can use as relevant and contributory. And what we're finding, of course, is that men are more likely to ask for that than women at the moment. We've looked at the system and can't find any discriminatory practices there, but what we then need to do instead is to be proactive in terms of all our new starters. So that's another action that we can see in the report. So those are just some highlights, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Martin?
Just one thing that threw me is the cover paper refers to it being up to the year March 21, but you've explained it isn't that year.
Apologies, Martin.
1920.
Yeah,
so my question is going to be, we're now 6 months past the next year end. Have you got any data? Is it too early to tell, or have we seen any improvements in closing that gap to under 5%?
We've got. I have asked for a snapshot, Martin, because I, like you, asked to see what are we going to be reporting next year, and we have actually not closed that gap as of now. So that's the first thing I asked for. So we do need to take some proactive steps in this space. What I'm also mindful of is that. And another question I asked is, can we disaggregate the data for NWSSP, NWIS and ourselves? Because of course we're still reporting on NWIS at the moment as part of this data. We're not able to do that as yet, because that again will help us understand where we might go and look at in terms of this work. So those are ongoing actions really, which we need to see if we can get underneath.
That's really helpful. Thank you, sir.
Are there any other points for Sarah? So, Sarah, we're asked to note this report. Is that right? But it is a report which is going to be submitted now to Welsh Government.
Absolutely right, Chair. We've sent this through Exec Management Board and QSP for approval, purely because of the timing of today's board meeting, because it's had to already be submitted to Welsh Government.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that report. So we come to section 9 on the agenda, which is the Charitable Funds Committee highlight report. So that falls to me. So the points I would just want to draw out from the highlight report is that fundraising activity has, as you probably don't need to be told, this has been affected by COVID. And there is still while there is still some uncertainty, activities are now returning. As we saw in my chair's report, I intended a bike ride, and there's lots of activities which are now returning. But then there are others, like some of the overseas events that were planned, we're having to still put on hold because of the circumstances in those countries. We've got a new interim charity director, Alaric Churchill, who's made a very good and busy start and intends to produce a 5-year strategy by the end of the calendar year, which will come to the charity committee and then will come to this board. We've begun the planning to have an annual meeting with our fundraisers, which we haven't done before. And this would be an opportunity in many ways for us, and I'm looking at our independent members who are trustees of the charity, an opportunity for us as trustees to meet with those individuals who give up so much of their time and talent to fundraise for us, and that we can connect with them. And we're not just talking about the Jonathan Davis who raised huge amounts of money, but we're also talking about individuals who raise small amounts of money frequently. The school that raises £500 is as valuable to us as somebody who raises a lot more money. So plans are in hand for an annual meeting toward the end of January, and hopefully COVID will be such that we'll be able to hold that meeting in person. I hope so anyway. We'll have to wait and see. In terms of finance, given the COVID environment, income has been strong, and the performance there has been aided by some very generous legacies to the charity. There's been some underspend, as you might imagine, attributable to COVID because of certain events that didn't go ahead. But the financial picture at this moment in time is quite strong. We are needing to re-tender for our investment broker because it's a quinquennial review, I think, of the current contract, and process for that is underway. And Steve Coriandis is leading on that, and we will complete a tender process in good time before the end of the current contract. We approved 2 business cases. One was a no-cost extension of an existing project, which had experienced some delays due to COVID, and the other one, we approved that there was a very strong bid, but we need to think a bit more carefully about a funding source for that. And so I've begun some discussions with you, Steve, but we need to formally meet and have some discussions around that. We've been looking at how we evaluate the spend that's authorised by the committee, because in the spirit of exercising good stewardship of the funds that are given to us, we have been strengthening what our expectations in what what needs to come back to us in terms of evaluation. So, we've been sending some evaluations back and saying we need a bit more information than this before we can sign that off. So we've strengthened the process of evaluation, and we have put in place also some mechanisms to support staff to enable them to write an evaluation which is a little bit more robust than we have been receiving. And I'm hoping that we'll see an increase in the quality of the evaluation reports that we get. We have appointed some new ambassadors just very recently. It was a busy meeting. Charity is very busy. Under Alaric's leadership is really reinventing itself with the fundraising team all receiving training that in health and safety, in event management, in marketing, and so on. So a very busy team there. So I'll take any questions on that report. We are not accessing our investment funds at this stage, and we decided that, and we approved, and I think it was in the consent agenda, our investment policy at the last meeting. I don't know if you want to say anything about this, the investment subcommittee, Martin.
You've covered it off really, Chair. The one major change was, as you mentioned, the policy which we agreed in consent. And just quickly to reflect on that, that was just to strengthen our ethical credentials, really, about saying that we are not going to invest in companies which are predominantly involved in fossil fuel production. So that was in addition to the traditional ones we've had about alcohol and tobacco and armaments. We've also taken note organisations which are predominantly fossil fuels. Kind of makes it a little bit awkward for organisations perhaps like BP who are involved in green energy and fossil fuels. So we use predominantly as a marker there. And the other thing we've put in there is where supply chains and ethical investments as well. So companies need to prove their ethical credentials before we invest them as well.
And that will feed through into the procurement process for the new investment broker.
And indeed, our current investments have been adjusted to reflect the wishes of that investment subcommittee. So any holdings which we had in those areas which were marginal have been sold, and other investments have been purchased instead.
Thanks, Martin. Are there any questions or queries for the Charity Committee? Thank you. I think we've come to the end of the meeting. Oh, sorry. Stephen, sorry, I can see you now, Stephen.
It was just a more general question about the appointment of a new investment broker, and I sit on the investment subcommittee. But what is typically happening in other sectors is that different investment groups are coming together to get better rates with investment advisors, because we're a very important charity, but of course the funds we're investing are actually quite tiny compared to many other funds. And clearly there's a cost to an investment broker, which includes an overhead. So I'm wondering if we've given any thought, if this was a straightforward NHS service, it'd probably be an all-Wales tender. So I don't know whether there is an opportunity here to try and actually bring different NHS charities together as part of this process, or at least award a contract that allows others to join and take advantage of economy of scale in terms of investing going forward. It's probably a bit late in the process now, but it's a thought that's occurred to me as we've had this conversation.
It's not late in the process, Stephen, because Steve Phalangelis has been in correspondence with myself and Matt only today, just sorting out some of the tender paperwork. So I'm sure Matt can take that back to Steve and have a conversation with the charities and see if it's possible. But in principle, it's absolutely right. But I think that our rates are not exceptionally above the market rates in terms of the costs of the investment managers, I think. So we'll have to look at whether it's a worthwhile. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Any other? I look up, I can't see any hands. By the time I look down at my papers, somebody's put their hand up. It happens in a nanosecond. I can't see any other hands up. Okay. So I haven't been informed of any other business. Does anybody want to raise anything about any of the items that we've discussed today and perhaps didn't feel you had an opportunity to raise it at the time we were discussing the particular agenda item? I wouldn't want anybody to go away saying, I wish I'd said that, I wish I'd commented on whatever it was. Does anybody want to come and raise a point to anything we've discussed on the agenda today? If not, then thank you very much for your attendance today and for some of you bearing with us while we attended the NHS Confed keynote addresses from the First Minister and the Health Minister. I declare the meeting closed, and the next meeting will be on the 25th of November at 10 o'clock. And so that closes the public board meeting, and we now move to the private board session, and we adopt the resolution that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting, having regard to the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity on which would be prejudicial to the public interest in accordance with Section 1(2) Public Bodies Admissions to Meetings Act 1960, paragraph 67. So part B is due to start at 3:45.
Yes. So I was just going to suggest, Chair, because we're running 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So now that you have closed Part A, just to check whether, I mean, we've got a lot on Part B, haven't we? Whether we start
quite a lot, yeah. So do you want to suggest that we start at 3:30?
Yeah, I think that would be good. So we can try and finish by 5. That suits everyone.
Is there anyone else joining us, Lauren?
Is David Powell coming? I can juggle the agenda around
exactly.
for David and things, I think. So if we could start that meeting at 3:30 then, colleagues. So thank you, everybody.